1975. In the New England beach town of Amity Island, a group of young people are drinking and partying on the beach. A young couple sneak off together to go and have a late-night ocean swim.
Where are we going?
Swimming!
She takes all of her clothes off and dives into the water, unaware that something else is lurking beneath the surface. Soon enough, she's attacked, mauled, and dragged back and forth by an unknown predator. Something big, powerful, and aggressive. While the premise of this 1975 shark attack movie Jaws is fairly simple, a great white shark starts attacking people and must be hunted and destroyed, the making of this movie was anything but. A young up-and-coming filmmaker called Steven Spielberg was given the job by Universal Pictures of adapting Peter Benchley's hit novel, but ended up running over 3 times over budget and 100 days over schedule. Plagued with technical problems, Jaws could have been a complete failure, and Spielberg's career could have easily ended there and then. But the film was finished, and when it was finally released, audiences couldn't get enough. From a budget of $9 million, it went on to make over $470 million domestically, making it one of the biggest grossing movies of all time and basically creating the summer blockbuster. Spielberg proved himself to be one of the most talented filmmakers in the world after overcoming so many technical hurdles and somehow still managing to create something truly special. A movie that perfectly straddles the tropes of swashbuckling adventure movies for all the family with monster movie horror. A movie that worked so perfectly as a popcorn thrill ride, but one that scared audiences so much that even to this day, nearly 50 years on, people around the world are scared to go into the ocean as a result of this movie. Join me as we continue exploring the evolution of nature in horror and we discuss Steven Spielberg's Jaws.
For Christ's sake, tomorrow's the 4th of July, and we will be open for business. It's going to be one of the best summers we've ever had.
Happy 4th of July weekend and welcome back to the evolution of horror. My name is Mike Muncer and as ever I am your host. In this podcast we explore and dissect the history and the evolution of the horror genre one subgenre at a time. We are currently in the middle of our 10th season exploring the evolution of nature biting back in horror, and this is part 10. This is the big one, the one that so many people have been waiting for. This week we are simply going to be discussing one film, Jaws from 1975, a gargantuan movie. There is so much to cover and so much to discuss. Coincidentally, this episode has landed on the week of the 4th of July, which is so exciting. So I thought I can't miss this opportunity. I've got to drop the episode a day early. So if you are listening to this on the day it drops, happy Independence Day for our US listeners out there. And if you're a UK listener, go and fucking vote. Right now, go and vote. Immediately. Thank you very much. Okay, joining me to discuss this movie, a very long-time friend of the pod. She was here in our last main feed series discussing Fatal Attraction and Misery with me. But she is, of course, my fresh blood co-host, my screening partner in crime, and Jaws just happens to be her favourite movie of all time. Welcome back, Becky Darke. Hello, Becky.
Hello.
Becky, it's summer. We're in July. The sun is shining outside. Are you feeling that kind of summer spirit?
Yeah, I'm going to head down the beach and get eaten by a shark.
Yeah.
Yeah, can't wait.
It's going to be a good 4th of July. Can't wait.
It's the perfect... It's actually sunny for the first time, basically this summer. Yep. Summer, she says in speech marks. So, yeah, perfect weather to discuss the best and biggest summer blockbuster ever.
Oh my God, I'm so excited. Becky, first of all, let me just ask you about this kind of subgenre that we're talking about. So animal attack movies and kind of nature biting back. Apart from Jaws, what are your kind of thoughts on this subgenre as a whole?
Love it.
Yes.
Yeah, love it. This was one of those seasons of yours where you sent the list. I mean, you didn't even send me the list because we knew it was going to be Jaws, but like I've seen the list and I was going through, I was like, fuck, I could have done about 10 of these episodes. Like there's so much good stuff, especially like in my kind of wheelhouse and my passion point of like the 90s. Like,
oh my God, the Deep Blue
Lake
Sea,
Placid,
Lake
Anaconda,
Placid.
Deep Blue Sea, you know, just such a fan.
I know. You saw the list and you were like, who's getting to talk about this one? Who's getting to talk about? I was like, Becky, you can't talk about all of them. You're doing Jaws.
No, I'm greedy. Yeah, I mean, I'm slightly cross that I don't get Lake Placid specifically, which is one of my favourite films ever. But yeah, so I would say fan of Nature Bites Back films. I find them genuinely scary,
right?
Because animals are really scary,
right? And this was going to be my next question for you. I know we've talked about this together before. Are you much of an outdoorsy person? Are you likely to go swim in the ocean, explore the rainforest, walk through the desert, etc.?
Absolutely fucking not. So I do consider myself a bit of like an indoor baby. Like, you know, I like my comforts. Mm-hmm. I'm very pale. I don't like getting sunburned, and I don't like sort of things buzzing around me and all of that kind of
You're
thing.
like a kind of 19th century noblewoman or something. You know?
Absolutely. Yeah, I never thought of myself that way, but now you say it. Yeah, that's very much my vibe. But weirdly, like I grew up, as you did, in the home counties. And so I was kind of surrounded by quite a lot of green. And so when I was a kid, you know, I used to go out for walks in the woods and, you know, sort of... there was like a place near our where I lived called like French and Ponds, and you know that used to be like a really nice kind of like Sunday day out with the parents, you know, like out and about. I was never really like a tree climber, not very active, but I like being out in nature in general, as long as nature just kind of minds its own business and doesn't get up in my grill.
Yeah. I completely agree. I think we're very much the same on this. Love animals, love watching animals, love how they live their lives. Mm-hmm. And I don't need to meddle in the way they live. They don't want us meddling, right?
Absolutely.
Like, leave them be.
Live and let live. And this, you know, do you like to swim in the sea? Absolutely not. I genuinely don't. We've discussed it in the past. So sorry to anyone who has heard me say this before, but I've got vertigo, and I've also got this thing where if you're in the sea, which I don't do, but if I did, like that space below you, like I don't like it at all. I like not even just kind of what lives down there, which is obviously scary in itself, but also just like that feeling of like space below you. It just really, really freaks me out and gives me like quite a physical kind of reaction where I just like panic and just need to get the fuck out. So no, going to the beach and stuff, I'm very much with my cocktail, on my towel, with my book. Yes. Because if you go in the sea where humans aren't supposed to be, Mike, there's lots of stuff in the sea that is supposed to be there, like sharks and jellyfish and God knows what. So yes, very much if you encounter one of those things and you come off worse for wear, I have very little sympathy for you, I'm afraid. Right,
exactly. It's interesting, isn't it? Because these films are stressful, and I think I agree with you. I find some of these movies really scary, but they balance a really interesting kind of tone, don't they? I think because it's not like a home invasion movie where they are all relentlessly dark and bleak. These movies have a reputation as being really fun, right? They're like a really, you know, again, you've mentioned like Lake Placid, Deep Blue Sea. They have a real kind of reputation as being like big, fun Saturday night kind of crowd-pleasing popcorn movies, don't they really? But they can be incredibly stressful, right?
Yeah, I do. I think there is something about that balance that kind of makes them really good kind of popcorn munchy movies, because there's usually lots of action, lots of sort of, you know, peril and things to be up against, but there is always there's often a sort of thread of like irreverence running through them. There's often sort of a comedy element, and so there is something about this subgenre that probably more than any other does sort of walk that line between like like comedy and horror, or at least that sort of like, that feeling of like these sort of bigger movies where there's lots going on and, you know, you just sort of like sit down and like enjoy it rather than sitting there like chewing your nails off for 90 minutes in something like a serial killer movie, right, or a home invasion or something like that. Or even things like folk horror, which are often like so kind of like dread filled.
Yeah.
And I guess out of all of the subgenres that Nature Bites Back would kind of cross over with would be something like folk horror, because again, you have that sort of idea of like the natural world. And in both of those, the natural world is kind of coming together.
Yeah, I mean, we've just spent the last 2 weeks talking about Aussie horror films of the 70s. So Waking Fright, Picnic at Hanging Rock, Long Weekend, Razorback. I know that you have been to Australia before, Becky, and I know that, again, like it's not somewhere you want to mess with, right, in terms of the nature.
No, absolutely. I'm a huge fan of Aussie horror. As you know, we've talked about it on your Patreon. I don't know, they've got such a like singular way of making horror films. And I think so much of that just comes out of living in Australia where everything is trying to kill you. And I know that is an old cliche, but it's true. Like, you know, the landscape is trying to kill you. The sun is trying to kill you. The sea is trying to kill you. Creepy crawlies and reptiles and, you know, kangaroos. Kangaroos aren't cuddly, Mike. They will kick you in the face.
Oh, I know. But I've watched so many poor kangaroos be killed in all the films I've watched for the last 2 weeks that I'm just like, leave the kangaroos alone.
Yeah, fair. Yeah.
Oh, well, let's talk about, I mean, let's be honest, probably the most important film in this subgenre, if not one of the most important films ever made, really. And so this is going to be an overwhelming discussion, Becky. We'll try and keep it within 2 hours, right? But there's going to be so much to say, and inevitably, I'm going to get feedback from people saying, I can't believe you didn't mention this fact, or I can't believe this wasn't mentioned. So just bear with us. It's a beast of a film, right? We're going to do as best we can.
You use the word overwhelmed. I am overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Like, this is both the easiest podcast chat I will ever have, and also like the most stressful because the weight of it is weighing on me slightly. It's my favourite film of all time, so even just from a personal standpoint, I really don't want to fuck it up. And also, there's so much about Jaws out in the world. Like we were talking before we hit record, you know, like which of the books or documentaries or podcasts or anything that's been made about Jaws over, you know, the last
50 years,
50 years. That was Becky
Math
kicking in there, a moment where I immediately doubted myself. You know, like there's so much out there in the world that's already been said about it. And so there is that part of you that sort of thinks like, what am I going to say that hasn't already been said? But also, you know, that everybody kind of already like knows everything. And so it's like, well, if I miss this one bit, then people are going to be cross. It's like, it's a lot,
right? So just please, everyone, be kind to us. We are going to try and cover all bases. We're going to talk about this movie. We're going to analyse it. We're going to talk about why it's such a horror classic. We're also going to try and pepper in stories of the behind the scenes and, you know, all of the stories of what went on while making this movie. We're going to try and discuss as much of it as we can. Some things may get missed. That's the nature of podcasts. But let's get into it. Becky, let's talk about Steven Spielberg's Jaws from 1975.
There is a creature alive today who has survived millions of years of evolution without change, without passion, and without logic. It lives to kill. A mindless eating machine. It will attack and devour anything. It is as if God created the devil and gave him jaws.
We're in the fictional seaside town of Amity, a tight-knit community where men fish, women sunbathe, teens have beach parties, and kids karate picket fences. Amity is a tourist town and makes its money from the visitors to its beautiful beaches. But after a girl is attacked in the water late one night and is then found washed up in just enough pieces to fill a tray, new Chief of Police Martin Brodie has to battle the locals and the town mayor to do what's needed to keep people safe. A further brutal attack in full sight of the crowded beach compels the mother of the dead boy to offer a reward for catching the massive shark responsible. And we're introduced to Quint, a salty sea dog with a boat and a grudge, and Matt Hooper, a smart young upstart from the Oceanographic Institute who refuses to accept flimsy statements of boating accidents as an explanation for the mounting body count. But the 4th of July is here, and that means money. So in an example of grim political hubris, Mayor Vaughan orders the beaches open. Big mistake. The hungry shark reappears, terrorises Brodie's son and some other kids, and eats a nice man who's just trying to help pretty much whole. So Quint, Hooper and Brodie are finally allowed to board the Orca and head out to sea on a hunting trip. Cue lots of bawdy sea shanties, male bonding, barrels and blood as a battle to the death ensues between a 25-foot miracle of evolution and 3 guys just trying to save a town.
Oh, beautiful synopsis. You've been prepping that your whole life, Becky, and I loved it.
Yeah, just had that in my back pocket, you know.
So you've already mentioned this is your favourite movie of all time,
Of all time.
Your number one, which I'm sure it is for so many people in the world, right?
I know, yeah, that's not groundbreaking.
But do you remember the first time you ever watched Jaws? And kind of, did it instantly become your favourite, or did that kind of happen over time?
So I do remember... So the first time I saw it, I actually didn't see it in its entirety. It was more a case of like my parents had it on and it was coming up to my bedtime. And so I think like I didn't see the beginning, and where I really remember coming in was, I think like around the cabin scene. But I don't really like remember Quint's big speech and stuff. What I really remember is them singing the song and then all of a sudden all hell breaking loose and the board starting to split and the water coming in and thinking like, this is really scary. And then it was just a film that was kind of like on a lot. And so I think over the years, I would have then, you know, sat down and watched it from start to finish. And yeah, I mean... I don't know when it became my favourite ever film, but I don't remember it not being my favourite ever film, if that makes sense. Like it's just always been there. And I've watched Jaws more times than I've seen any other film. I probably watch it 2 or 3 times a year and have done for years. And I'm just, it's just like, it's one of those ones that just makes up my like personality, basically. Like I just adore it. I think it's the most perfect piece of cinema that has ever been created.
It's kind of like a miracle, this film, isn't it, really?
Yeah,
that it is
100%.
As perfect as it is, despite the fact that it very nearly could have never happened. Like, this film could have been scrapped. If this film had been made today, it would have been scrapped. Steven Spielberg would have been fired. This movie would have been shut down. Like, it never would have seen the light of day. Or if it had, it would have been quickly knocked off inside a studio in a big tank and looked really naff in comparison, right? Like, there are 1,000,001 ways in which this movie shouldn't have happened. It's like a real lightning in a bottle movie, isn't it? And we'll get into all that as we go. But I agree with you. I think this is a perfect movie. It actually took me a couple of goes to really get on board with it, actually, I've got to say. And I wonder whether, and we'll get into this in a minute, I wonder whether it was my expectations of whether or not this movie was a horror film when I first saw it. Because when my entry to Steven Spielberg, and I've talked about this a lot, was Jurassic Park. Like, I was at the age where that, you know, I was like 6 years old when that came out. It absolutely scared the shit out of me. And that still remains my personal favourite Spielberg film, one of my favourite films of all time. And I finally saw Jaws when I was a teenager, after all the hype and being told it was the most terrifying thing and it's the reason that the whole world is scared of the ocean. And I remember absolutely loving the first half and getting a little bit bored in the second half, which like, I know is kind of awful, it's sacrilege to say. I think as a kind of like gore-hungry teenager thinking that I was going into a kind of real out-and-out monster movie, I started to be a bit like, what's all this? Sea shanties and monologues? Like, when are we getting back to the killing? And I think it took me a couple of watches before I really, like, fell in love with the movie in its entirety, including the characters and including everything that goes on the Orca. And now I think that stuff is the best stuff in the film.
Yeah.
But you know, I think it was just... It always comes down to expectations, I think, doesn't it, with some movies? And this was one of those movies that, for me... It just got more and more and more perfect every time I watched it.
Yeah.
Like, the more you watch it, the more you go, oh my God. Like I say, this is a kind of miracle of filmmaking where every single element is just perfection. Like, you couldn't, there's not a single thing. Maybe a couple of tiny glimpses of Bruce the Shark. Other than that, there is not a single flaw in this film, I would say. Like, it is an astonishing piece of work. Yeah.
It is, like, just the screenplay, like, it's so smart and tight, and it's like, it's over 2 hours, Jaws.
Yep.
And the pacing of this film is unmatched, I think. It always, and consider, you know, the fact that I've probably seen this film, I don't know, 50, 60 times. It always catches me by surprise when you're on the beach for the Kintner attack. Because
it's so quick.
It's so quick.
Yeah.
It's like, it's in the first, like, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes?
Yeah. Earlier than that, even. I think it's in like the first 10 minutes or something. It's mad.
Crazy.
Yeah.
And then you're at the town meeting, and then, you know, it's like, it's just bang, 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 bang. And it just doesn't let up. And as you say, you're so right. It is a film of two halves. And so the action changes, but the pace never lets up. And I think that is a miracle. The fact, you know, because there are some films that you'll watch and you will, like, really, really prefer kind of one part of it to another, because, you know, it will slow down or it will start too slow and you're kind of struggling with it, and then it'll pick up and you'll sort of, you know, you'll be like, oh my God, by the end I was I loved it. But with Jaws, like, it doesn't even seem to matter when those sort of shifts in tone and action happen. You're just in it constantly. And like, you just can't, I just can't tear my eyes away from the screen, because I feel like if I do, I'm going to miss something.
Yeah.
Because it's so dense, but at the same time, it feels very light touch.
Yeah.
Like, it's all so organic and natural. And honestly, I mean, it's a miracle.
Well, I feel like the easiest way to do this is to kind of maybe go in kind of vaguely chronological order through the film and talk about different elements of it as we go. But I want to start just by asking you about Steven Spielberg. So Spielberg, obviously, I think he was 27 years old when he made this. That's so, I mean, God, it's just...
Yeah, fuck off, Steven.
When I think about what I had achieved by 27, I'm like, oh, fuck you. And he'd already made Duel by this point as well, which is also just like one of the purest, just absolute scariest movies ever made. This was obviously the film that kind of made him, but he had made Duel already and a couple of other kind of minor projects at this point. He came on board again. Like I said, he could have so easily been fired and never heard from again in Hollywood, I think, thanks to this film. But thank God he didn't. What do you think it is about Spielberg particularly that just really perfects movies like this, movies like Jaws, like Raiders, like Jurassic Park? Like, I just feel like nobody does these types of movies like him.
Yeah, I mean, he's so good at kind of anchoring these sort of quite bombastic ideas around big sharks and dinosaurs and aliens, you know, in like humanity. Like, he's so good at directing people, for starters. And also he's like, the way that he storyboards and puts together the flow of a film, the way that he composes shots, like, his approach to action is just so singular. Like, you can tell a Steven Spielberg film just by watching, you know, a kind of isolated action sequence, because of the way that he shoots people's reactions to things, or, you know, frames. So with Jaws, he was so determined to make sure that basically, like, all of the principles would be in shot at the same time. So if you think about when the three guys are on the Orca, you've got Quint, Hooper and Brody. They will all be on the boat. You've got the open ocean in shot. You've got the shark in shot. You've got the horizon in the background. Like, he doesn't rely on kind of movie magic and like these kind of like tricks of, you know, shooting people from far off in sort of silhouette and then coming into a tight close up to show you who you're looking at and all of that. It's like everything is there in the shot. And I don't think that anything else like really like immerses you and makes you feel like this action is like really happening in front of you than like it's not all these kind of like layers. Like, obviously the editing in this film is amazing, but what he actually shoots in camera, I think, is what makes Jaws, like those action sequences specifically, like really stand out.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I think that emphasis on the people as well, right? Like, I think what's so amazing, he's clearly such a technician. Like, he understands the language of film. I was thinking about that film, The Fabelmans, that he made kind of about himself, right? And, it's kind of very autobiographical. And there's those amazing sequences of the kind of young, Spielberg, in inverted commas, when he's making films as a teenager with his friends, and he's like discovering that if he like pierces holes in the celluloid, it creates a little flash of light, and he has that for when bullets go off in guns and stuff. And he was like, and he actually did kind of figure out all of that kind of stuff. And I think he was the person that kind of really understood how to use a camera and the technical side. But I think what he is also incredible at is, like you say, giving everything that human touch, like putting humans front and center, human reactions to what's going on. He includes humor as well as horror, and I think that, and of course, and sentimentality. And I think sometimes he's kind of slightly written off as being a bit of a kind of schmaltzy Hollywood guy. And like, you only have to watch Jaws. And, when, like you said, in the opening 15 minutes, a child is literally ripped apart on screen.
Yeah.
And Jurassic Park, which is a family film in which children are, very nearly eaten on screen and attacked, and, people are killed on toilets and everything else, right? Like, he knows how to be properly brutal as well at the same time. Like, I've always thought of Spielberg as an excellent horror director above everything else as well. Like, he really understands kind of tension and jump scares and dread. And again, like that Orca, that final act on the Orca, I think, is just filled with dread above all else, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, he was initially a little bit hesitant to take Jaws because he had made Duel, which is this film of absolute dread. It's basically like people say, it's basically like Jaws but with a truck. This like relentless, almost like kind of like Terminator kind of feeling of just like you just can't get away from this thing. And he was initially a little bit hesitant to take Jaws because he didn't want to be like the guy who does the trucks and the sharks. But he used what he'd learned. Duel was a like TV movie, but it was so successful that it actually ended up getting a like theatrical release in Europe.
Yeah.
And he'd obviously proven himself to producers, but he also like learned so much from making that film in terms of creating, as you say, like this horror and this dread that he is so good at. And he learned that so early. Like it's got to be like in his DNA because then, as we say, like when he comes on to make Jaws and he brings some of that with him, it all just feels so natural. And like he's one of those geniuses that we'll come on to talk about it, about what a nightmare this film was to make, and yet you watch it now and it looks easy.
Yes, completely. You'd never know that anything went on behind the scenes when you watch this. Yeah. And it's the same with Jurassic Park, like all the most groundbreaking kind of effects and things you can imagine, and yet it just seems breezy and easy the way it's made. So yeah, I want to talk about this opening scene because I think this is interesting in terms of talking about it in a horror context, right? Because how interesting, this movie kind of came before Halloween, it came before Friday the 13th, it came before teen slashers, and yet look at this opening scene where you've got these kids like drinking, fooling around on the beach. Two of them run off to go off and swim naked together and have sex, and then one of the girl gets naked, takes her clothes off, and then is violently ripped apart by a monster. This to me is like a quintessential kind of slasher sequence almost, right?
Yeah, like slasher cold open,
it's
right?
a slasher cold open. Like,
Yeah.
It's really interesting. You know, I've talked a lot about slashers and slasher evolution, and we always negate to mention that this film came before the slasher boom, and it really is, like, right there, front and center. This is, in so many ways, set up to be a slasher movie and a horror movie, right? And so let's get into this debate, Becky, because this has been a debate that's gone on for 50 years. Is Jaws Jaws a horror film or is it not? Now, obviously, I am very much in the camp of this is a horror film. But what do you think, Becky? You're not so much in that opinion, are you?
Yeah. So when it kind of came out that I was doing Jaws for the evolution of horror, so many people dropped me lines like, "Oh, you're doing Jaws on the evolution of horror, are you, Becky? How interesting." Because I am on record as saying that Jaws is not a horror film. So let's address the great white shark in the room. I have come around to a certain extent. The reason I used to say, like, you know, I will die on this hill kind of way that Jaws was not a horror film was because I grew up with it and I just never thought of it that way. Like, for me, it was, I don't know, like in my head, it just didn't really have a genre. It was just Jaws, right? It was just Jaws. And although it is terrifying and terrified me, I think for me, like, if I'd had to kind of put my finger on it at the time when I was like falling in love with it, it was very much like this character piece and an adventure film. And maybe it's just because I'm a bit of a sicko that none of the kind of, you know, blood and guts and that for me kind of turned it into a horror film in my head. But I just never ever thought of it that way. And it honestly, this is true, it wasn't until I started hanging around with you bunch of weirdos that all of a sudden I was like, oh, Jaws is like on everybody's like top 5 horror films of all time list. How weird. Like, Jaws isn't a horror film. And then I started saying that to people and people started looking at me like I was an idiot and telling me I was an idiot. And I was like, oh, okay. So I guess Jaws is a horror film. I don't think it is. But, you know, fine. Like, I have been persuaded to a certain extent that you can't really deny that if you've got kids being eaten in full view of a beach, including his mum and an enormous geyser of blood kind of shooting up out of the water and severed heads popping out in jump scares and, you know, huge toothy monsters literally biting men in half in front of you and limbs kind of floating all over the place. Okay, like, fine, I'll hold my hands up. It's a horror film.
I understand that, though. Like, it depends on the context in which you watch it. And when you watch it as a kid as maybe like this kind of Moby Dick-esque adventure film, you do see it with different eyes. And, you know, I think probably the Becky of 2024, if you watch this for the first time now for Fresh Blood, for example, I'm sure you wouldn't have any problem acknowledging it as a horror film, right? But I think it depends on when you watch it in your life. And I think it is really interesting the way it plays with genre, because this opening scene is absolutely a horror opening scene, right? Like, it's a slasher scene. It is absolutely ticking all the horror boxes. But again, like I said when I first watched it, when you get to that second half on the Orca, it does shift into something else. The score is different. The tone is different. We are much more in that kind of like, I don't know, that kind of Saturday serial matinee movie adventure swashbuckler kind of a vibe, aren't we? I think?
Yeah, definitely. And again, I think because when I was a kid, this wasn't a film that I would put on late at night and turn all the lights off and, you know, sit there with my sort of duvet pulled up to my nose because I was so scared. This was a Saturday afternoon film.
Right. Yeah.
I would just stick it on and watch it. And so again, like, I don't think I had that kind of like that context of watching it like as a horror film. You know, I feel like that when I was watching horror as a kid, I was often like in my bedroom, kind of watching it on my little TV, and it was late at night and I was watching it on Channel 4 or something, and it felt kind of like illicit and dangerous. I've never had that with Jaws. It's always just been like, oh, I've got a couple of hours, let's pop Jaws on.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. So that opening set piece, you've got these two characters, this actress, Susan Backlany, right, who goes into the water, who is the first victim of Jaws. And obviously this is where we really set up the kind
I love that we're calling him Jaws.
No, oh God, no. What I meant was the first victim in Jaws. Okay, let's just be clear about that. The shark is not called Jaws. I know people get very cross about that. I think this is obviously what really kind of sets up the language of the film as well, right? In that we don't see a shark here. We see this girl get kind of dragged around screaming. The camera is kind of positioned under the water and just at the surface of the water. The music comes in, John Williams' score, and we kind of put the elements together, right? And we'll talk about this as we go in terms of the problems they had actually putting a shark on screen. But how do you find this technique, I suppose, of Spielberg, instead of showing us a shark, doing everything via kind of trickery, I suppose, like that's underwater cinematography and that incredible John Williams score?
Oh my God. I mean, there are so many kind of apocryphal tales about Jaws. And, you've got books like Cole Gottlieb's The Jaws Log, which, he was there, he was kind of, he worked on the screenplay. And so that is very much kind of like your window behind the scenes, and has probably spawned a lot of the kind of tales behind it, as have, countless interviews, as we've already alluded to, with all of the cast and crew. But one of the stories about this opening scene is the actress, they kind of put a life belt or something like around her waist. They tied ropes to it. They sunk concrete blocks on the floor of the sea, on the floor of the ocean, and kind of put the ropes through the blocks. And then you had guys on shore pulling the ropes to and fro and pulling her to and fro through the water. And the story goes, it actually cracked a couple of her ribs. And so when she screams ow, it hurts, and she goes under the water and the water goes into her mouth, she literally just had her ribs cracked by them kind of practically pulling her through the water. And if you think about how hard it is just to walk through water, if you're kind of walking into the sea or into a swimming pool, and she was being literally pulled to and fro. But they're having to resort to things like that because it's one of those, it's probably the quintessential example of filmmakers having to be inventive because they are working up against these sort of trials and tribulations of what they kind of maybe initially envisioned or wanted to do. Yeah. And so like you say, it is so reliant on suggestion, and obviously John Williams' score, the film plays so amazingly with the music, because there are moments when the camera might be suggesting that the shark is just about to attack, but because the music doesn't play, that is when it will turn out that it's the hoax of the boys with the sort of fake shark fin on their back and stuff like that. But this is, as you say, it's establishing this language where that music builds and builds as she is screaming and going under the water, screaming for help. And the music is just it's all encompassing. It's in your ears. It's this huge signpost to what we will later come on to learn is the shark. And then they both just cut, the music and the screaming, as she is pulled under. And then there's just silence. And again, there's something about water as well, that if your head's underwater, you can't there's that sort of muffled sound. And then all of a sudden, the film is silent and she's gone. And her poor bloke is passed out drunk on the beach and it's absolutely useless. I mean, it's amazing.
It's incredible, isn't it? And I think it's almost we take it for granted now, that everyone knows these were the techniques used. You can't hit, again, it's just I've talked about this a lot with things. There are some monsters and characters and tropes in horror that you just seem to now just be born with the awareness of. You don't have to know and have seen Dracula to be able to do the kind of Dracula voice. And like, you know, and I think it's the same with this, like, people will go into the ocean and they'll go da 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 da. Like, it's like you're born with that knowledge now, right? It's really weird. It's like, it's not something. Yeah,
it is like, it's like a collective, like a genetic, like the DNA, like the historical DNA thing.
Yeah, it's so weird. It's like that ubiquitous, I think, isn't it? And it's incredible. What an incredible thing that they were able to get around the technical limitations by giving us a shark with those kind of two notes of the score, really. And that camera and the cinematography is incredible too, isn't it? Because, you know, they had to come up again with kind of all these techniques. Bill Butler, the cinematographer, came up with this kind of glass box, right, that he put the camera in so that he was able to get not just underwater shots, but shots kind of on the surface of the water. And I think that's some of the most important stuff, isn't it? Because you get the kind of shark POV shots, which are horrible, which really emphasize that kind of space that you were talking about that really scares you, the space under your feet when you're in the ocean that you can't see, right? And that stuff's incredible. But also that stuff that's right on the surface where you can see the surface of the water kind of bobbing around. So like the top half of the frame is above the water, the bottom half is below it. And so you really feel like you're at human eye level with what's going on, don't you?
That's the human POV, isn't it? That is what it's like when you're swimming. And I'm not the strongest swimmer either, which probably sort of feeds into the fact that I'm not particularly comfortable in the ocean. But there is something that you even when you're watching the film, you just like feel like you're just about to like go under the whole time.
Yes, yeah, you want to kind of come up for breath almost, don't you? Yeah, it's so clever. So I think all of those kind of techniques just kind of, again, like subconsciously work on us, I think, don't they? To just feel that absolute danger and dread throughout that opening sequence. And yeah, not a shark in sight throughout that whole opening scene. Incredible, right? So then we go to the next day in the kind of aftermath of that, and we meet our main character, Chief Brody, or the first of our main characters, on Amity Island. What do you think of Brody as our kind of main protagonist and this Roy Scheider performance?
I love him. He's great. He's the perfect. This is a bit folk horror because him and his family have basically moved from New York City. Yeah. Roy Scheider was known before Jaws for playing these kind of like gritty New York cops. So in, films like Freakins, The French Connection. And here he's playing a bit more of he's a family man, and he's kind of moved his family from New York City in the greatest turn of irony ever to Amity Island to basically keep them safe away from all the gun crime and stuff. And then they start getting eaten. Yeah. And yeah, Scheider he's so good. He plays he's got quite a he's quite complex actually in his performance, because Brody really goes on this kind of arc where at the beginning of the film, he's chief of police, but really he's having a lot of his decisions kind of influenced and made for him by people around him. So, whether that is the mayor or being kind of under pressure from the local community. And because he's new and because he's not an islander, so they make this big point about if you're not born on the island, you're never going to be an islander. Yeah. And so he is kind of seen as this fish out of water. And so he has this authority of being the chief of police, but actually you get this impression that he hasn't got a lot of kind of say in things. He hasn't got a lot of clout yet. And so he keeps getting kind of sidetracked and manipulated, really, to the point that, people are dying. And so by the end of the film, Brody, and what Scheider really allows Brody to do is to kind of reckon with that, his own weaknesses, and kind of conquer his demons, both internally and with this big kind of toothy embodiment of his demons. And also there's all that funny stuff about he's scared of water. Yeah. There's a clinical name for it, isn't there? Yeah, drowning. Yeah. All of this, he doesn't want to go on the boat because he's scared. And it's so perfect. He is the hero at the center, but he's flawed and he's vulnerable.
Yeah, he's not like this big macho kind of hero figure, is he? I think Spielberg sort of said like Brody had to be the audience, basically. Like Brody was us, and I think initially Charlton Heston wanted to play this part, and I think Spielberg was like, no, he's too heroic, right? He's too kind of well known as being this kind of like, you know, this kind of butch guy who's going to conquer the monster, I guess. And
he'd like just made Earthquake, and so he'd like battled that, and he'd just done like, I don't know, one with an airplane where he just managed to like land a plane. Right. And they were like, we can't have him also beat a shark. Like, this is ridiculous. We need more of an everyman.
Exactly. And I think he was even slightly worried initially about Scheider being, you know, the tough guy from the French Connection and everything. Right. But he did it kind of perfectly, didn't he, in this? Like, he has got that absolute balance of a kind of a hero you want to root for, but also, an everyman, right? Yeah. Like somebody everyone can relate to. And he's, you really feel that kind of that conflict within him throughout the whole film, I think, right? As he's just desperately trying to kind of like hold things together and not quite know what his place is in this community and on this island. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's really when for better or worse, it's really when his family is directly in danger, when Michael has almost just been eaten by the shark in the pond. And, you know, they're at the hospital, and that is when you kind of see that real switch in Brody where he's just like, I'm not taking this shit anymore. Sign the papers. We are hiring Quint. We are getting this sorted. Mm-hmm. And like, you know, he's handsome and he's like, he's sexy and he has that sort of sexy relationship with his wife. And it's like, he's like perfect leading man.
Yeah. Evolution of Horror is going back on the road this summer. If you are UK based, then please check out our events page, evolutionofhorror.com/events, as we are going to be travelling around the UK to host various different events at various screenings. We've got some new things that are yet to be announced, but we will be announcing them in the next couple of weeks. But if you are listening to this on the day it drops, then this Saturday, that's Saturday the 6th of July, I am going to be introducing a special screening of Gaspar Noé's Climax at the BFI IMAX. Climax at the IMAX. Let's go see Gaspar Noé's intense headfuck of a film on the biggest screen in the UK on Saturday night at 11 p.m. I absolutely cannot wait. Join me if you dare for that special screening this Saturday night, 11 p.m. kickoff. I'm going to be presenting a special introduction before the film begins. If you are in Birmingham or within reach of Birmingham, then we've got loads of exciting stuff coming up over the summer. This month on the 20th of July, Becky Darke and I will be in the Mockingbird Cinema in Birmingham to host a 25th anniversary screening of one of the greatest and scariest movies ever made, The Blair Witch Project. I cannot believe that film is 25 years old, but yes, we are going to be in Birmingham on the 20th to show that film to an audience on the big screen. The film is going to be followed up by a special live panel discussion. Tickets for that are selling fast, so if you can come along to that on Saturday the 20th of July, grab your ticket now. Moving on to August, very, very excitingly, I am going to be in Leeds on the 22nd of August, the beautiful Hyde Park Picture House, one of the most gorgeous cinemas in the UK, and I am going to be hosting a special screening of David Lynch's Fire Walk with Me. For anyone that might be listening to The Detective and the Log Lady, who might be following along with Twin Peaks, this is your chance to watch the incredible film Fire Walk with Me. It's a film that's actually quite hard to get hold of. You can't buy it on Blu-ray or DVD here in the UK anymore unless you get like a second-hand copy. It's not streaming anywhere, so it's pretty difficult to watch. So this is one of those rare occasions where you can watch the film, but not only that, you can watch it on the big screen in one of the most beautiful cinemas in the country. It's also going to be introduced by me, and it'll be followed up by a special live panel discussion. I cannot wait. And tickets for that are also already selling really fast. So please grab your tickets for that if you can. Going back to Birmingham in August, we're going to be hosting a special screening of Phantasm from 1979 for its 45th anniversary. That's going to be really, really fun. And in September, Friday, the 13th of September, we're going to be in Birmingham at the Mockingbird for a special 40th anniversary screening of one of my favourite Friday the 13th movies, Part 4, the final chapter. That's going to be me and my dream warriors, Becky Darke and Stevie Webb. The three of us will be having a live on-stage discussion of the movie after the screening. So come and join us. Watch a Friday the 13th movie on the big screen on Friday the 13th with Stevie, Becky and I. Tickets for all of these events are on sale right now. So just head on over to evolutionofhorror.com/events. That's evolutionofhorror.com/events. Right, let's return to our discussion of Jaws. Let's talk about the writing too. Like, obviously this was based on a Peter Benchley novel, but it was changed quite considerably. And I think the majority of the screenplay was done by Carl Gottlieb, right? And there are, again, infamous stories about this, about how the script was literally being written page by page, day by day, right? As they were filming it. They went into production literally with no script, right? And then Carl was just writing pages. Occasionally members of the cast would write in bits of script that they think their characters would say. Like, Spielberg described it as like a really collaborative thing when it came to the dialogue. And again, maybe that's why, but the dialogue feels so natural, doesn't it? I think, you know, like those moments between Brody and his family, or the moments on the beach, which we'll get to in a minute, when people are kind of talking over each other and there are conversations going on with different characters. And, and of course, we'll get to the orca later, but the dialogue is just perfection, isn't it?
It is.
See the kids?
They must be in the backyard.
In Amity, you say yard.
They're in the yard, not too far from the car. How's that?
Like you're from New York.
They cast some members of the of Martha's Vineyard where it was filmed, so you get that kind of like that authenticity of these kind of old sea dogs. You know, it sort of riches it all up.
Yeah,
but yeah, like the chemistry that is created like through these interplays between people. Like, I love a quotable film, and this is one of the most quotable films. Like, you know, again, I'm that obnoxious one that just like, don't watch it with me because it will be unbearable. But like, it's so quotable. It's so funny and it's poignant, and it's, you know, as we've said already, like, it's organic. The way they layer the sound, the way you've got people talking over each other, the way you can hear sort of people in the background. Like, I think about the like town hall scene.
And then we're going to try and use shark spotters on the beach.
Are you going to close the beaches?
Yes, we are. We're also planning to bring in some experts from the Oceanographic Institute on the mainland. Only 24 hours. I didn't agree to that.
Only 24 hours.
Again, it's rich and dense. You know, it's not just that you've got these two people talking in a conversation at each other on screen. It's like, no, you've got this community, this feeling of this like world that you are living in, where people's like panic is rising. And not only are they sort of trying to safeguard their livelihoods, but as the film unfolds and you've got new relationships building and people kind of realizing that, you know, the people around them are dying, and how do you reckon that with, well, if we shut the beaches, we're all going to lose our business. Like, it's incredible the way that they managed to weave all that in, and yet, like we say, it doesn't slow anything down. The pacing is just constant, so it's so rich.
Yeah, I know, and I love that. And I think, you know, Spielberg really wanted that authenticity. You know, he was so kind of adamant, right, that the scenes on the ocean were shot on the ocean, and that 90% of this film was shot on location. Like you say, Martha's Vineyard was where most of this was set. And again, you really feel Amity feels like a real lived-in place, doesn't it? I think, like, it feels like you say, he used residents from the town. there's just that authenticity that you wouldn't get if this was filmed on a studio backlot, right? Like, and I love that about it. And the characters, the larger than life characters, the accents, like all of the kind of world building, I suppose, of this film, I think sometimes is sort of understated just how good that stuff is,
Yeah, absolutely. But do you know what? That's almost what shows what genius world building is if you don't notice it.
Yes.
Because you're just in it, aren't you? The fact that it's just, you just feel like you've just been dropped on Amity Island and you're kind of walking around the streets. And early on when Brody has just like gotten the call and he's doing the typewriter, shark attack, and then he's going out to get all the paints and the boards and stuff because they don't have close the beach signs. And that, those brilliant shots where he's sort of walking around and then the deputy pulls up in the truck and like they sort of swap over and there's all this like life buzzing around in the background. Like it feels like you've just been dropped there in this place that exists, which then makes it all the more effective when they all start getting bitten in two.
Exactly this. And let's talk, I think there's another really interesting kind of theme, right, that is kind of introduced here that feels like, it's still proven to be so relevant even today over the last few years, the memes of the mayor, right? The mayor who was essentially Boris Johnson for us in this country. But this idea of like capitalism, right? Trumping all things, no pun intended. Like,
yeah.
And I think that really comes through, especially the older I get and the more I watch this, right? Is that it's like the real villain of this film actually the mayor, right?
He's better dressed than Johnson, though.
Better dressed, absolutely.
That anchor jacket. If I die without owning an anchor blazer, I'll be very sad. It was just so pertinent when we were all watching, Boris Johnson. Oh God, I can't even say his name.
I know.
On TV, basically saying like, it's cool, like everything's fine. We're opening it all up, and we're like,
you sure? There was like another 30 people that died yesterday. No,
like literally yesterday. Like, you sure? Yeah, is this good? Is it okay? And obviously the internet just exploded with memes because it was so perfect. Poor Larry. Like, I do have some sympathy for him because, what a shitty position to be in. And I'm very much here defending Larry Vaughan and not Boris Johnson. I want to make that clear. But, he is the mayor of this town. They make their money through tourism. And you've kind of got these two sort of upstarts, really. You've got Brody, who is new in town. And then you get Hooper turning up, and like some of my favourite scenes are between Brody, Hooper, and Vaughan, like the one in front of the big billboard, where they are all just again like screaming over each other, and then like really needling each other. And Larry says to Hooper something like, "You'd love to prove it, wouldn't you? You'd love to get yourself in the National Geographic." And the way that Hooper just like looks at him just like aghast and then just like bursts out laughing because he's like, who the fuck is this idiot? And he is this, like, he's just capitalist political hubris, just like sort of boiled down into one fantastically clad man.
Yes.
But, he is sort of having to balance this, like, well, I've got pressure from the townspeople. I'll have pressure from, I don't really know how towns work, the shareholders, for argument's sake. And at the same time, he's got people being eaten all around him. And I think there is that thing where he's like, how far can I push it? Will the shark just go away?
Larry, if we make an effort today, we might be able to save August.
August? For Christ's sake, tomorrow's the 4th of July, and we will be open for business. It's going to be one of the best summers we've ever had. Now, if you fellas are concerned about the beaches, you do whatever you have to make them safe. But those beaches will be open for this weekend.
He kind of established the trope that became known as kind of like the cinema bastard, right? Like there have been some really fun pieces about this, about that kind of archetypal capitalist shitbag who isn't necessarily the out-and-out villain, but is kind of in many ways the worst character of the bunch, right?
He's not the xenomorph, but he's the one that sent them all to get the xenomorph.
Exactly. He's Burke from Aliens. He is Walter Peck from Ghostbusters, right?
What?
These kind of these bureaucratic,
bureaucrats,
capitalist, kind of selfish men who ultimately are the cause of more deaths than the monster, right? And I think, that archetype is just perfected and kind of invented here with this character, right? So good. He kind of wants to dismiss that opening scene death, right? Chrissy's death as just being, she got caught up in like a boating accident,
boat propeller,
right?
sure, why not?
Apart by a boat propeller, sure. So they leave the beaches open, and then bang, like you said, like within that first 15 minutes, we get one of the most iconic kind of horror set pieces of all, which is this just phenomenal sequence. And I feel like I could spend about an hour just dissecting this sequence, right? I think it's just masterful filmmaking. You've got this busy beach filled with tourists, people sunbathing. You've got Brody kind of trying to keep an eye. He's feeling slightly tense about what's going on.
Yeah.
Hey, Mike, I know you got a lot of problems downtown, but I've got a couple of problems at the house I wish you could take care of. One, I've got some cats parking in front of the house. I can't get down to the office, and that garbage truck next to the office has got to be moved. So what I need is a red zone. It's a simple thing you can take care of. You've done it before.
People are coming up to him and constantly talking to him in the foreground, and Spielberg uses loads of kind of like split diopter lenses and stuff, right, where you can see people kind of like yammering to him in the foreground, but sort of stuff's going on in the background in the sea as these kids are playing. Little Alex Kintner goes off with his inflatable and says goodbye to his mum. Oh, God. And there are a few kind of false alarms here and there, and eventually it culminates in this poor little kid getting eaten on screen, right? Like, again, what a masterful sequence from beginning to end.
I have a question for you. Does Pippet the dog get eaten as well?
I think so.
Yeah,
I
think Pippet goes first.
Yeah.
So not only does he kill off a kid, he kills a dog as well.
He breaks both rules.
Right, both rules. And I ever had the audacity to say this wasn't a horror film. Outrageous.
I know.
Yeah, I mean, everybody talks about the sort of dolly zoom, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that incredible shot and the sickening strings that come in that moment. And it's like, it's a physical reaction. Like, it literally feels like you're about to throw up. This sort of combination of everything, the look on Brody's face, the camera, the music, and this just sudden burst of graphic violence of this kid. And, he's really cleverly used like a yellow lilo, which is like the perfect contrast to the blue sea. And so, immediately, because you've just seen Alex take the lilo out and it's bright yellow, so that as soon as that attack happens, there's no doubt in your mind at all that it's this sweet little boy who's just been begging his mum to stay in the ocean for 10 more minutes, and then this realization that if she'd been a bit more strict and said no, like, you've had a long enough, like, no 10 more minutes, like, he'd still be alive. Like, I mean, it's just it's heartbreaking. And then you get this panic, all these people rushing out of the sea, and then as Mrs. Kintner kind of walks down to the edge and she's just calling his name over and over, and you just realise he's gone. He's just he's shark food.
The build up is just incredible. I think, like, that again, just like the sort of hullabaloo of everything going on the beach, and Brody kind of trying to keep his eye on what's happening. You just feel something's coming. And maybe this is where we should talk about like the problems that they had with the shark, with Bruce the shark, right? Because initially, in his original storyboards, we were going to see this shark eating people, right? From that opening sequence to this sequence, we were going to see a shark come out of the water and devour people. And it just didn't work, right? They had built this incredible thing that all different parts of it moved independently with different controls, and there were different levers and different people controlling different elements of it. It was all filled with wires and mechanics, and they had tested it a couple of times, I think, in a tank in California, and it kind of worked. But as soon as they got it into the salt water of the ocean, it just fucked it, didn't it, basically? Yeah. And this thing proved to be the absolute biggest obstacle for them. Yeah.
So, you would have, the cast and crew just sort of sitting around reading books and smoking and chatting because, you know, they were waiting for the shark to work and they were having to figure out, okay, well, you know, this is kind of what's next in like the filming schedule. So this is what we're working up to, but the shark is not working. And then it would suddenly come over the like walkie-talkies or something, like the shark is working, and so everybody would suddenly like jump into action.
Go! Yeah.
But like that didn't happen a lot, and so they had to find these other ways to shoot these sequences, and that is why, you know, arguably the film is as successful as it is, because it relies on the music. It relies on this sort of these reaction shots, these teases, these just sort of a flash, like, oh my God, your blood runs cold when because you don't even really see what it is, and that makes it all the more terrifying. This you know, classic thing of the classic, the less you show the monster, the more terrifying it is. And that moment where he's got the Kintner boy and the shark sort of rolls over in the but you can't really
I can never quite make out what we see there. Do we actually see the shark there, or is that just the kind of lilo flipping over?
No,
like,
you do. You see like fins and the tail, and it's all like pitch like jet black, but it's for the splittest second, and so, you know, your brain goes, what the fuck was that?
Oh.
And then there's just this blood. And so, you know, they're using techniques like that. They are using techniques like the barrels. So, you know, there's supposed to be, when they're out on the orca, there's supposed to be so much more action, like with the shark. But, you know, they had to come up with this idea of, okay, well, we'll use the barrels. So if we can't show the shark swimming up to the boat, we will show the barrels on the surface, these big yellow barrels, yellow again, you know, these bright yellow barrels that are kind of, and again, like, it's not like they're just like, oh, well, we'll have some barrels. They start with one, and then it's got two, and then it's got three. And so that is building the tension, because you get lines which will have been worked into the script while they were shooting and trying to figure out all this barrel nonsense from Quint, where he says something like, he can't stay down with three barrels on him. He can't. And it's like, well, he fucking is. And you're like, okay, well, this is terrifying, but you're not seeing anything, Mike.
It's so good because it works so much better than just showing the shark, because it also shows the might and strength and size of the shark too, right? Like by that, exactly, the fact that it can pull three barrels down underwater, the moment where it attacks the two fishermen in the night and it pulls the pier completely away, right? And so you would literally see like this kind of boardwalk moving around as the shark is attached to it. So it shows just how big and mighty this thing is as well, without ever having to show anything.
Oh my God.
So clever.
That is one of my most sickening moments in the film, is when the guy, one of the fishermen, has been pulled in and he's swimming and he's swimming and he's swimming. The guy he's like, Charlie, don't look back. Take my word for it. Just swim as fast as you can. And then he gets back to the jetty and his like shoes are like slipping on the boards as he's trying to get out of the water as the shark is advancing. Like, it is so scary.
You can see why no one ever wanted to go in the sea again after watching this film, right? Absolutely. But I think all of that is just so clever, unintentional. And, you know, I think it's interesting that, you know, to reference kind of, there was a Spielberg quote and he kind of references two of the films I've already covered this season, because he sort of says, I had to, in the end, make it less Kong and Godzilla and more Hitchcock, essentially, right? Like, originally he wanted to have a Godzilla-style big showing of the monster attacking the town, and instead he had to go with Hitchcock techniques of what you don't see, of dread, of anticipation.
I just went back to Alfred Hitchcock. What would Alfred Hitchcock do in a situation like this? So, imagining a Hitchcock movie instead of a Godzilla movie, I suddenly got the idea that we can make a lot of hay out of the horizon line and not being able to see your feet, not being able to see anything below the waistline when you're treading water. What is down there is what we don't see, which is really, truly frightening.
Like you said, that famous dolly zoom on Brody as a reaction shot, which is, for people who don't know, it's kind of where they kind of move a camera in one direction on a dolly and zoom the lens in the opposite direction. So it might move towards Brody, the camera's moving towards him, but it's zooming out, and it creates that weird, nauseating kind of effect where the background seems to kind of move behind, like it's almost like a kind of rush of blood to the head happening or something, right? And it's been used over and over again. It was first, like, sort of famously first used in Vertigo, in Hitchcock's Vertigo, of course, like as Jimmy Stewart is kind of looking down, you know, and he gets that kind of feeling.
That idea of Vertigo, that idea of being in the sea and that thing, but like it all just knits together so neatly to create this dread, this like subconscious fear that humans have, and it's just like, you know, splashing it all over the screen in front of you to scare the shit out of you.
Oh, it's horrible, isn't it? So poor Alex Kintner is dead. We get that famous scene when his mum comes over to Brody, slaps him around the face and said, you know, you knew that there was a shark, you know. And again, like, that's such an iconic moment of Jaws, isn't it? And it's a real gut punch.
Well, when she fucking lamped him as well.
Yeah.
Chief Brody?
Yes?
I just found out that a girl got killed here last week. And you knew it. You knew there was a shark out there. You knew it was dangerous. But you let people go swimming anyway.
Lee Fierro, the actress. I don't know. I might not be 100% right about this, but I don't think she was like a trained actress, so she probably hadn't gone through kind of like stage combat skills or something. So she basically didn't know how to pull a punch. And so she just lamps Scheider around the face. Oh my God. And it is such a gut punch. And when she lays it out in front of him, which is one of the moments that really sort of adds into Brody's arc, I guess. And she says, you know, you knew, and still my boy is dead. And then obviously the mayor sort of says to him, like, I'm sorry, she's wrong. And Brody's like, no, she's not.
Yeah, it's devastating, isn't it? And then, of course, enter Matt Hooper, Richard Dreyfuss's character.
Be still my beating heart.
Becky's fanning herself right now.
Here he is.
You're a fan of Hooper?
Love a nerd. I love a nerd. And here he is.
Beardy nerd with a beanie.
Yeah, with his little fuckboy beanie. Like, honestly, sign me up. I love him so much. And he's great. Like, he's, again, you know, we'll come on to talk about, like, the trio of these three men. We spoke about Brody. Here's Hooper. And he's, like, he's different, right? He's, like, he's rich. You know, he comes from this sort of good family. He's really young. He's this sort of this arrogant sort of upstart, but immediately you see, like, he's got so much authority where Brody kind of doesn't. Like, he just shows up off of a boat and he is suddenly, like, taking control of all of these nutters who have shown up with their dynamite and their rowboats and, you know, their shotguns and God knows what. And he's saying, like, you know, just scull that out of here. And, you know, Brody, these guys, these guys are going to go out. They're not going to make it out of the harbour alive. Yeah. And, like, he just turns up with all of this knowledge, all of this authority, and he's exactly kind of what Brody and what the film needs. What we need, we've got a great big shark. We need a shark expert, and here he is.
Wow. Martin, there are all kinds of sharks in the waters, you know? Hammerheads, white tips, blues, makos. And the chances that these bozos got the exact shark...
there's no other sharks like this in these waters.
It's 100 to 1. 100 to 1.
So good. I mean, this is like, again, you know, it's such a great combination of characters, and I think what he brings, like you say, he brings a new energy to the film. I think when he enters, he's got quite manic energy.
Oh, big time,
as well, right? He's this kind of like slightly manic nerd. He really knows his stuff, and like you say, he has this authority, but at the same time, he is this nerd. And the moment when he like does the autopsy on the shark, and he's like, like, you know, like he's also not this tough guy as well, right? There is no kind of, I don't know, there's no like just kind of pure Indiana Jones type hero out of all of these men in this film, right? They all have their own strengths. I guess similarly, Spielberg did something very similar with his Sam Neill, Laura Dern, Jeff Goldblum combination in Jurassic Park, right? It kind of mirrors that, where you've got you know, a kind of more of a nerd, more of a specialist, maybe one that's slightly tougher than the others, but like none of them are just this kind of like all-round hero, I suppose, you know.
Loads of sexual tension between the three of them.
Oh, yeah. Love it. Well, apparently, because, you know, obviously this film ran like 100 days over schedule. I think they were in Martha's Vineyard for like 160 days or something. And apparently Richard Dreyfuss just like slept with half the women in Martha's Vineyard. Like they just had parties almost every night. The women absolutely loved all of these actors and particularly him, you know.
Transport me back. Where's my time machine?
I know. Hello everybody, just interrupting this episode momentarily to thank our Kickstarter backers for supporting Final Cut, the official Evolution of Horror card game. Final Cut is finally available to buy. You can head to our online store right now, evolutionofhorror.com/shop, and pick up your copy of our horror movie themed card game. The game mechanics were created by the brilliant Alex Ayling, and the game was illustrated and designed by the brilliant Mike Lee Graham. It is such a fun game to play. You can play it with kids, you can play it with people that don't know anything about horror, or you can play it with horror experts. It doesn't matter. Grab your copy now while stocks last. evolutionofhorror.com/shop. But I've got to thank the next 30 Kickstarter backers who are the reason that this game exists and the reason the game is now on sale. So a huge thank you to Jamie Ward-Brown, Cara Henson, Dan Gilmore, Nick George Woodward, David Turgay, Bob Fleck, Emma Clark, Pamela Hollingsworth, Emily Lecoq, Rebecca Hall, Alfie Parsons, Gabriella Batista, Lauren Carnell, Andy McCartan, Logan Brown, Andy Bowman, Peter Strain, Elizabeth McKee, James Vicari, Hugo, Jessica, Vegary Grickerick, Thomas Bishop, Ariane Carrara, Buradori, Rich Stone, Joseph Oliveira, Peter Muffich, and John Dodson. A huge thank you to all of those people for supporting our Kickstarter campaign. And one more time, if you want to grab your copy of Final Cut, get it while stocks last, head to our website, evolutionofhorror.com/shop. What is it, Becky, that you love particularly about Richard Dreyfuss? Because, I mean, he was like the real hot thing at the time, right? I mean, this is the thing. All of the women were falling over themselves for him, apparently, while he was filming this, because he was this kind of young, cool up-and-comer. He had been in a couple of projects. He had starred in a George Lucas film by this point, right? American Graffiti. He was in another couple of projects that he was about to get rave reviews for, which is part of what causes problems between him and Robert Shaw, which we'll talk about, right? But he really was kind of the hot thing at the time, wasn't he, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And you're right, it is that kind of that like burst of energy that he brings, you know. He does feel like, and you know, this contrast to Robert Shaw, who had such a distinguished career, and you know, he was English and he sort of had that real like sort of thesp vibe about him. And then you've got this sort of young, cool Hollywood actor who was sort of coming out of this like new school of Hollywood, and working with with George Lucas, with Spielberg, like this sort of new sort of stable. And yeah, I mean, he's just great. Perfect casting.
So good, right? And there's this kind of whole section in the middle, isn't there, where they think they've caught the shark and they've caught a tiger shark, right? And again, there's just some really great character stuff that you get in this middle section of the film, like where Hooper comes to the Brody household for dinner. They all get really drunk, you know, and then they do a bit of investigating, and they go and do the autopsy, and then there's that terrifying sequence when they go out on the boat in the middle of the night as well. But I really love all that stuff, that kind of like middle act stuff between Hooper and Brody, you know.
How was your day?
Swell.
Yeah. I got red and white. I didn't know what you'd be serving.
Oh, that's nice.
You said just now that you'd be able to talk about the beach scene for an hour. I could talk about that dinner table scene for an hour. It is my favourite scene in the movie. It is just like, if you're looking at the screenplay, for me, that scene just encompasses it so well.
Is anyone eating this?
No. My husband tells me you're in sharks.
Excuse me. Well, yes, I've never heard it quite put that way, but yes, I am. I love sharks.
You love sharks.
Yeah, I love them.
It's perfect. The interplay between the characters, the hilarious like lines, you know, that they're saying to each other about, you know, how was your day? You know, and they just laugh. He's like, swell. He's like, yeah. And then he's bought wine, and he's so sweet. He sort of turns up, he's got like a little blazer and a tie on, and his hair's all neat because he's like coming around. He's invited himself round for dinner. Like, he's like, is anyone eating this? You know, starts eating the food. And he's bought wine, and poor Brody is not having a very good time. Opens the wine. Hooper's like, you might want to let that never mind. As Brody pours it over what he's already been drinking. So he's got like a tumbler of whiskey and ice. Mm-hmm. And rather than seeing that off, he's like, no, just pours the red wine on top of the whole lot. Incredible. And just starts drinking it. And pours like the smallest little wine glasses of red wine for Ellen and Matt. And they're just like, no, we're fine. And he's just there sipping from this fucking dirty pint, basically, that he's just made himself. Oh. And then you get, obviously, before that, there's that beautiful moment. You when you were watching it last night, you like took a little picture and sent it to me, like with his little boy, Sean, and again, like, the cast were really, I was going to say they were encouraged to improvise. I'm not sure if it was that or they just didn't have a script to work with, but apparently kind of between scenes, Scheider and the little boy who plays Sean were sat at the table, and they just started naturally doing that thing. The little boy just started copying all of Scheider's movements. And somebody sort of called like Spielberg over, I think. Excuse me if I'm not getting all of these absolute details right, don't shout at me. But they sort of pulled him over and said, like, look at this. And they sort of stood there and watched it, and they were like, right, can you guys just do that again? Because we're going to film. Like, and it's again, like this naturalism and like forging this amazing relationship that Brody and Hooper have, which then obviously gets onto the shark autopsy. One of the best shots in the film for me is when he pulls out the Louisiana number plate and like throws it and it just like comes skittering towards the camera and then just perfectly like stops where it's supposed to be. Like, how many times did they have to try and shoot that to get it? So good.
And then that white liquid that comes out of it as well. Oh God, imagine the smell. Jesus.
So rank. And then like you say, they're that terrifying sequence when they're out on the boat and Brody is drunk, because obviously he is. Have you seen what he's been drinking?
All this stuff in a lesser film could have been the final act stuff, right? Like, it feels like that in a way, like the two men go out in the night and they're gonna, you know, try and catch this thing, and all this stuff happens. Like, it is that this easily could have been the film in a way, right?
100%. And you know, I'm sort of rattling through it, but that's kind of how it feels in the film. Like, again, it's this pacing. It is just, it's relentless. You know, it's just go. But at no point do you feel like it's running away with you. You still feel so immersed in it all. It's amazing.
Well, and this is interesting too, because the film made changes from the book, right? We haven't really spoken much about the book, but the book included a lot more kind of character stuff that made some of the characters less likable, and so they wanted to change that, right? But there was a whole subplot involving, I think, Ellen Brody having an affair with Matt Hooper, right, as well. And it became much more about this kind of this adultery and this marriage and everything, whereas actually, I mean, I don't feel like it wouldn't have fit in this film, especially with the pacing the way it is, right? But Ellen and Brody seem to have a very happy, healthy marriage in this film, as far as I'm aware, right? Yeah.
Want to get drunk and fool around?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do, actually. Yes, please. Yeah, definitely. And like, you know, then there was a whole kind of like morality tale that was kind of hooked onto that in the book, where Hooper actually doesn't survive at the end. You know, he's sort of punished for it almost.
Right.
And you're right. Like it would have just like weighed it down.
Yeah, it would have bogged it down for sure. Of course, one of the all-time great jump scares when they're down under the water and the head comes out. Right. That's a brilliant moment. Like, still makes me jump every time because of that noise, that loud, high-pitched noise. You know.
Again, you know, talking about Spielberg and his reaction shots, like the shot of Hooper his eyes just wide and like, oh my God.
Incredible.
Yeah. And the size of that fucking tooth that he pulls out of it.
Oh my God. Yeah. And then this is where, of course, they realise that it is a great white.
Mm-hmm.
The mayor still refuses to shut down the beaches, of course, until we get this next kind of major attack sequence that actually involves both Brody's and the mayor's kids, right, in danger.
Right.
And again, that little boy, Sean, protect him at all costs.
Oh.
He is the cutest thing I've ever seen. So again, Spielberg is so good at this. Like, again, very good at working with young actors, with
kids,
children,
absolutely.
right? And he casts some incredible kids in his movies, and I absolutely love these kids in this film.
I love them. Little shot where he's like crying on the beach and he's been sort of knocked over and he's all covered in sand and he's got like a real sort of like just such a down mouth. It's just like...
and, you know, who are these dicks with the fake fin swimming around, right?
So cross.
Yeah.
Honestly. Put them in fucking juvie.
Yeah.
I don't care.
Yeah.
Outrageous. But again, like when they come up out of the water and then they just come up to the fucking rifle, like right in their faces, which obviously, again, because it's Spielberg and he's a genius, is pointing down, you know, into the camera. And so we're there kind of like confronted with this rifle, these kids, and they're just like, it was just a joke. It's like, well, it's not funny, actually.
Yeah. And I love this idea, like a bit that I forgot to mention earlier on, just like a throwaway moment when Brody is worried about his kids playing on the boat, right? It's such a sweet moment, and I love the look of it too. Like, that's one of the most beautiful shots in the film, I think, that moment when they're outside and there's a kind of sunset sky behind them. Yeah. But Ellen's just like, oh, chill out. And then she's reading that book and there's that picture of the shark attacking the boat. And she just like yells at them to get the hell out.
You heard your father! Get out of the boat now!
These little moments of humour are so good, right? But I think this is it. This is the moment, isn't it, for I think everyone when enough is enough. Like, something is, you know, there is a real big danger in the water, or even the mayor is like, yeah, sorry about that. That's my
Yeah. And again, like I said in my synopsis, but this poor guy in his boat, and he's just trying to be helpful to the kids.
Yes.
And then that, oh my God, if you want to talk about your blood running cold, when he's been tipped out of the boat and you get that shot of the shark just coming up under him with this huge open mouth. And again, like all you see of it really is like maybe... I was going to say it's neck. Do sharks have necks? Probably not. Like it's like big mouth and like the sort of front part of his body. You don't see, but you can just like, you get the idea of the scale of it, and it just comes up and he disappears. And the next thing you see is just like his leg just like bobbing down onto the ocean floor.
Oh my God.
Grim.
I guess that's the first proper glimpse at the shark we get, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really, like that's the first glimpse of it. But I think again, it's handled brilliantly, that particular moment, because it's kind of translucent under the water, and
exactly.
It's a split second. It's fucking terrifying because you really see the scale from that overhead shot of how big it is compared to these people as well, right? It's so good.
When I'm in the sea, which I know doesn't happen anymore because I'm like, I don't have to go in the sea if I don't want to. I'm a grown up. But that's kind of what I always imagine is under me, just like at all points, just like a big open maw, just ready to like suck me in.
This is going to feel like a very obvious question, but, you know, sharks. What is it about sharks that, it's probably up there with spiders, I would say, as one of the biggest phobias for human beings, right? And there are probably more shark movies than any other killer animal movies out there. Probably that's partly because of Jaws, but also there is something about sharks inherently, isn't there? What do you think it is about them?
I don't know. It's funny, isn't it? Because you're more likely to get hit by lightning than you are to get eaten by a shark.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, if anything, I think there are now like activist group that are like stopping sharks, right? Like they're actually not that bad.
Again, back to my point. Leave them alone. Stay on the beach.
Leave them be. Yeah.
They're not actually like sort of coming up with their little fins up on the beach searching for people, are they? No, actually.
No.
Yeah. What's scary about sharks? I just think, I wonder if there is something about this, this sort of ancient kind of thing about sharks. They have basically been around since the dinosaurs,
right?
And they're still around. Dinosaurs, very scary, toothy, they'll rip you in two when you're sitting on the toilet. Everybody knows it. But sharks didn't get wiped out by a meteor. sharks are still there, and they have been for a very, very long time. And I wonder if there is something kind of innate in humanity where we all know that we're basically like the toddlers of the earth, right? We're just like running around, causing chaos, fucking everything up.
Yeah.
And sharks have been there the whole time, minding their own business and kind of like biding their time. And then we all don bikinis and go into the sea, and they're like, okay, finally, free lunch.
Yeah.
And who can blame them?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There's something almost like evolutionary in us that is like, that knows to fear them and avoid them, right? I think that's absolutely true. And they just look so scary, don't they? I think there's something about, and we talked about this together when we talked about alien films, there's something about creatures in the ocean that look alien to us, right? I think they're so far from human beings. I think we like stuff that look more like us, right? Things that have like big 2 eyes and a normal mouth, and, you know, but I think, you know, this weird thing that is kind of sleek and moves really fast but has those like unspeakably sharp teeth, and the fact that you don't know where it is ever too. Right. I think that is, it moves around under this shroud, right?
They
under
don't
this
sleep.
cover.
I don't trust anything that doesn't sleep.
They don't sleep, right? Oh my God, yeah.
I mean, it is almost like the xenomorph. You know, people talk about, they say in the movie, you know, this is a perfect killing machine, and like that was created, right? That was created by H.R. Geiger, and you know, it exists. There is one. There is one, just over there in the sea.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, that's the thing. Like H.R. Geiger, you know, based its look on existing creatures. That's what makes the xenomorph so scary, is that in our brain, it reminds us of certain other things, whether it's a face hugger that looks like a kind of spidery cockroach thing, or whether it's the xenomorph, which I think absolutely does have shark features, doesn't it? It looks like something from under the ocean.
100%. And also, and you know, because with the xenomorph, you get like his main mouth, and then you get his little mouth, little toothy mouth. And sharks have all of these rows of teeth, like they just go back into their heads, and then some of them drop out, and then they just bring more teeth forward. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah, incredible creatures, but let's just leave them be. Let's just all leave each other alone, right? So this is it. This is the moment where the film kind of switches, doesn't it? You know, like this is it. They've realised the threat is real. Even the mayor has realised this shark needs to be caught and killed before they can reopen the beaches. And this is where it becomes this kind of slightly more of an adventure film, and we're properly introduced to Quint as well, right? Played by the brilliant Robert Shaw.
No. He's from the ocean of
America's Cup trial.
Mr. Hooper, I'm not talking about pleasure boating or day sailing. I'm talking about working for a living. I'm talking about sharking.
Well, I'm not talking about hooking some poor dogfish or sand shark. I'm talking about finding a great white.
Porkers? Talking about porkers, Mr. Hooper. Just tie me a sheep shank.
What do you think of this character in this performance?
He is... He's kind of obnoxious, if I'm honest, right? Like, he's so provocative and frustrating and, like, arrogant and you know, like, I'll go out on my own. I don't need any, you know, kids coming along with me and slowing me down. And he is this salty old sea dog, so he brews his own moonshine, and he's got fucking vats in his weird shack with like shark jaws kind of bubbling away, and he
all the jaws and teeth everywhere hanging around his little shack.
Honestly, and you know,
he's a bit of a psychopath, actually, isn't he?
Honestly, like if this was a serial killer film, like that would be like bits of people. He's really kind of like, he needles at Hooper the whole time. There's this sort of class distinction thing going on, you know, sort of challenging him to tie knots and saying that he's got sort of he hasn't got workers' hands, he's got soft hands and all of this. And also, like, he's just like, he's kind of like crude, like he's, you know, here's to swimming with bow-legged women, and he's kind of singing these sea shanties. Like that bit when Ellen is saying goodbye to Martin.
It's like a really emotional moment.
It's so emotional.
Going on in the foreground.
And she's like, have you got all your seasick meds and stuff? And like, what am I going to tell the kids? You just got Quint in the background, like, farewell and adieu to your fair Spanish ladies. Like, it's so bad. Like, it's outrageous. But again, he's what the film needs and he's what the team needs, right? So you've got Brody, he's the man in actual authority, and it's kind of his job to do this. You've got Hooper, who has come in, who is the brain, right? He's got all the knowledge and all the fancy kit because he's bought it with his family's money. And then you've got Quint, who is the brawn, right? He's got the boat. He's got the sort of knowledge of shark hunting, and he's got the scars to prove it. And so he kind of just comes in and like squares off this circle almost. Like he's like. He sort of finishes this triangle and off they go.
and there is this, I don't know. There is not better chemistry between three actors that I can think of, than these three. Like, I think it's such a joy to spend the next hour of the film, right? Just with these three on a boat. Straight away, there is this tension between Hooper and Quint, right? They do not like each other. There's this kind of like old sea dog versus young rich boy. And he's like, don't give me this working class hero crap. And that is really fun. And I think obviously what adds to that is that there was this actual rivalry between these two behind the scenes, right? I think what's really interesting is that the dynamic between this triangle of characters sounds like it was also sort of the same between these triangle of actors, right? Where you had this unhinged old veteran really winding up this new young kid with Roy Scheider kind of trying to keep everything together in the middle,
stuck
right?
in the middle, trying to keep the peace. So
interesting that Robert Shaw apparently just really took a disliking to Dreyfuss, right, and just tortured him throughout this shoot.
Yeah, and from what I hear, like it's almost a bit sad because I think Dreyfuss came into the movie like fucking hyped to be working with Robert Shaw, right? He was like almost like hero worshipping and like really excited, like, this little puppy, like, yay. And Robert Shaw was just like, nah. I've got no time for you, no time for this. And like, he drank very heavily and was apparently quite sort of confrontational. And so it just, it was all quite sort of explosive behind the scenes. But again, these happy accidents, it all spills out onto what we see on screen in the film.
It's such a fascinating... You hear so many stories, don't you, about that, like you said, that kind of... It was such a transitional time in Hollywood. That new school of new Hollywood actors, the Marlon Brandos and Dustin Hoffmans, and versus the old school kind of actors that just could not deal with their bullshit, basically, right? That classic kind of a Laurence Olivier to Dustin Hoffman being like, my dear, have you just tried acting for once? Right?
I know!
That... Absolute. I think you really got the feeling that these old kind of classically trained actors just had no time, right, for these like young upstarts. It's so funny. And he made Dreyfuss's life a living hell. Dreyfuss had just, I think a new film of his had just been released, right? And he was getting rave reviews and he was reading like a double page spread in a magazine of this kind of like absolute kind of gushing kind of review of Dreyfuss and Dreyfuss's performance, and Robert Shaw just hated that apparently and just was like, who's this smug, arrogant young man? So I think
who's shagging his way around Martha's Vineyard.
And of course the other thing that made this even more intense was that this is the section of the film that was, of course, famously the hardest stuff to shoot, right? Like, never before had a film been shot on the ocean. Like, any water shots, we talked about Creature from the Black Lagoon a couple of weeks ago. Like, everything like that was shot on in a big water tank, usually, like on the Universal backlot or in a big studio under controlled circumstances. Spielberg insisted this was shot just in the Atlantic Ocean. And I don't think they quite foresaw all of the problems that would occur, right? Everything took like 10 times as long to shoot.
This is what happens when you work with people in their 20s, you know?
Oh, God. I would be annoyed if I was older. If I was from the studio system, I'd be like, what the fuck is this, you know?
Rein it in, Spielberg.
Rein it in, yeah. But apparently it was a nightmare. Like, every time like a sailing boat would come by, they would have to stop and wait for that boat to go past.
Because they needed that clean horizon.
They needed that clean horizon. Everything was kind of anchored, but yet it's still, things moved and suddenly shots would change. And because it takes, I mean, I've been on film sets before and it's fucking boring because it takes hours for any shot to be set up. Even in controlled circumstances, it could take like 3 hours for them to set up and light a shot perfectly. And that having to do that in the middle of the ocean when your light changes, the everything is moving constantly, right? Like
you've got a mechanical shark that doesn't work,
right? So and so they were falling behind, and so all that happened was these 3 actors just had to sit on this boat, just getting on each other's nerves, right, for days on end, to the point where there's actually been even a stage play about this, right? The Shark is Broken, is it called?
The Shark is Broken.
Did you see it, Becky? Did you watch it?
No, because I'm, as we've discussed in private, I'm too poor to go to the theatre.
Fair enough. Theatre is very elitist, to be fair. It should be cheaper.
It is.
Yeah.
It is, but it's Shaw's son.
Oh, it is freaky, right? So I went to see it. It's a really great play set entirely on the set of Jaws about these 3 actors that were just waiting for the shark to be fixed and them making small talk. And Robert Shaw's actual son plays Robert Shaw, and it is like seeing the real. It's like a ghost. It's really freaky, actually. Like all 3 actors.
I've seen him do like the speech.
Yes, of
and
course.
It's almost like deep fake. Like you could always, it's unbelievable.
It's actually mad, yeah. So this is it. Like, again, it's the stories of behind the scenes were as infamous, right, are now as famous and celebrated as the film itself. But aside from the behind the scenes stuff, how do you find this kind of whole second half involving these 3 men on the boat?
It's just like, you know, their chemistry, their interactions is just so perfect, and they all have like. The actors are all, and it's probably because they sort of lived in these characters for way longer than they were supposed to. Yeah. But they're all just seem so kind of immersed in Quint and in Brody and in Hooper. You know, they're just these 3 like fully formed people that you're watching interact on this boat. And again, like the screenplay and like the naturalism between them. You get some of the most, iconic lines, iconic interactions, talking about like Dreyfus and Shaw. You then get these brilliant bits where Hooper is like pulling those faces behind Quint's back and, not going to take this abuse much longer, like kind of taking the piss out of his accent. And also
all of that's happening while they're in real mortal danger.
Like real danger.
That's what I kind of love about this. Like, I'm just going, oh my God, the boat is filling up with water, and they're still making like snidey comments at each other and stuff, you know?
And poor Martin, is so unhappy. Like, he's so uncomfortable. He can't, he's on chum duty because he can't drive the boat. And
I love the way Quint treats the chief too. He's quite nice to him when he calls him Chiefy.
Sweet. I know, Chiefy.
And teaches him to tie knots and things.
It's really cute. And when Brody like pulls the wrong line and the like tanks come spilling out, and he gets told off by Hooper, and then Quint just sort of says to him like, if you want to know which one to pull, just ask me next time. It's like, so sweet.
Again, like an interesting character. He's not just this one thing, Quint, right? He's not just like shouting at everyone. There are these weird layers to him, but that also makes him all the more unpredictable. And I think it's quite scary to watch because you do feel like he's genuinely unhinged. And we'll get to his backstory and the monologue in a minute, but like I I think you just get the feeling he doesn't care if he dies, right? He doesn't care if he brings all three of these men down with the shark.
Absolutely.
Almost, right?
Absolutely.
Which is terrifying for the other two, particularly Brody, whose family are waiting for him at home.
Yeah, it is scary because he's so unpredictable. And you can see it sort of, they know, they've had a couple of interactions with him before they're on the Orca. But once they're out there in the open ocean and, things start going wrong and he is sort of more and more consumed by essentially what is a revenge mission, his behavior becomes more and more erratic. And, you can start to see it in the other two's eyes. They're sort of almost like looking at each other like, this guy isn't all right, and I don't think we are either.
Back home, we got a taxidermy man. He's gonna have a heart attack when he sees what I brought him.
And also, the shark itself becomes much more of an actual monster in this final section, right? Like, it's no longer just a shark minding its own business that happens to find some juicy, delicious legs to eat. Like, it's now properly become a man versus monster showdown, hasn't it? Where the shark is actively trying to sink these three.
Yeah.
It's not just leaving them alone or getting away from them. Like, it's a real, like, battle to the death, isn't it, at this point?
It's a really interesting shift where you've gone from the beaches, where you can kind of believe like, well, this is a creature that is just doing what creatures do. As Hooper says, it's an animal that swims and eats and makes little sharks, right? So he's just there eating. He's found a buffet. Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. He's just doing what sharks do. And again, if you're in the water, more for you. Yeah. But at this point, it does switch. And all of a sudden, the shark becomes almost like sentient. Yeah. It's like this. It is this battle between. Yeah. It's malevolent. Exactly. He's like, okay, right, you're after me, so I'm now after you as well, and I've got bigger teeth.
Yeah, it's incredible, and particularly I think because of the Quint character, and like you say, this kind of revenge mission, there is this feeling of hero versus villain, I think, right? David versus Goliath kind of thing going on in this final act. So yeah, maybe we should talk about the Indianapolis monologue again, because it kind of gives me chills thinking about it every time I think about it. Like, we get to the evening time, the three of them are all having a drink, and again, I love all of this character interplay. They're comparing their like scars and body parts and all of that kind of stuff, and it's just like three men on a boat just like kicking back and killing time at this point, right? And again, the chemistry is incredible.
So good when they're comparing scars. And Hooper and Quint are going through theirs. So, one of them's got a scar from a thresher, and then one of them's got one from like a moray eel or something. And then they're getting more and more jokey because they're pissed. And Hooper opens his shirt and he's like, what about this one? And he's got a really hairy chest. And so Martin says, you're wearing a sweater. And then he's like, no, this is my broken heart.
Yeah.
And then poor Martin pulls up his jumper and he's just got an appendix scar, and he's like, this is the only one I've got. And the other ones kind of don't see it, but he's just sort of looks at his own little scar and then just puts his jumper back down. And then obviously, it moves over to Quint and what's that one? Oh, I had a tattoo removed. Let me guess, mother. And Hooper it's the funniest thing he's ever said, right? He thinks he's the funniest man ever, pisses himself laughing. And you can immediately tell that it's nah.
Nope.
And the way, again, the fucking tone shift at that moment is unbelievable.
What's that one? What? That one there, on your arm.
Oh, well, it's a tattoo. I got that removed.
Don't tell me. Mother. What is it?
To Hooper, that's the USS Indianapolis.
You were on the Indianapolis?
It just stops. Hooper stops laughing. Brody says, what happened? And Quint, Shaw launches into this speech about him being on the Indianapolis, the USS Indianapolis, which is the boat that delivered the bum. Or the bomb, if you're saying.
Yeah, the bam.
not in Quint's accent. So the Hiroshima bomb,
which was a real thing, right? As in the Indianapolis. This is a true, but this monologue was a true story, right? Yes. People actually survived this, which is really chilling. And I think something really interesting about it that, I don't know, this is kind of why I love doing this sometimes on the podcast, where I'll watch these films in sequence. And we've talked a lot about Godzilla and Hiroshima and people messing with nature and the consequences of nature, and it's so interesting that it's even kind of wrapped up a little bit in this film, right? That there's this whole backstory about, like you say, these men from America who delivered the Hiroshima bomb, who are the reason, in part of the reason as to what happened in Hiroshima. They delivered the bomb. But then they get shot at by a torpedo, their ship sinks, and suddenly you've got 1,100 men just in life jackets, just treading water in the ocean. And then they start getting circled and picked off by sharks. And there was no distress signal sent out. These men were literally just left for, I think, up to 5 days, just treading. I mean, this is everyone's worst nightmare, isn't it? Right? Just treading water. You're getting delirious, you're dehydrated, and there are sharks circling you and picking you off one by one. And I think he says, right, 1,100 men went into the water, only about 300 and something actually survived. It's just devastating and absolutely terrifying, isn't it?
There are still sharks out there in the water who are like, remember that amazing meal we had that time?
Yeah, right? Yeah, they're still out there.
Still out there, just full. They haven't eaten anything since. They're just like, oh, my tummy.
No. Oh my God.
And, again, apocryphal stories about the making of Jaws, but Shaw was in the scene. I think he was pissed, like in real life, not just the character. Kind of fluffed it a bit. Yeah. There were loads of rewrites. The screenwriters were still sort of making edits the whole time. And in the end, the take that we get is Shaw just kind of almost like ad-libs it. He's like, I've sort of written it myself. He was a bit embarrassed about the fact that he'd gotten drunk on set and like he'd kind of fluffed this take before, fluffed this speech. And again, I'm joking about, sharks having full tummies and stuff, but this is about something real and something really serious. And I think that he was quite humbled by that. Yeah. And so he basically sort of took it upon himself to like write this speech and then on the day just delivered it. And it is one of those, I've seen Jaws in the cinema a couple of times. I also saw it at the Royal Albert Hall where they had the like live orchestra playing the John Williams score, which might have been the best night of my life. Yeah. And that is the moment in the film where obviously, just like in the cabin, you could hear a pin drop. Yeah. Everybody is just silent and rapt.
Out comes the nearest man. That man, he starts pounding and hollering and screaming. Sometimes the shark would go away. Sometimes he wouldn't go away. Sometimes that shark, he looks right into you, right into your eyes. You know the thing about a shark, he's got lifeless eyes, black eyes like a doll's eyes. When he comes at you, he doesn't seem to be living until he bites you, and those black eyes roll over white, and then you hear that terrible high-pitched screaming. The ocean turns red, and in spite of all the pounding and the hollering, they all come in, they rip you to pieces.
And it's one of the most powerful moments in cinema history. I mean, there's no two ways about it.
Do you think there is some kind of like thematic connection there? Is there a reason do you think that this monologue was so important to this story about these men delivering a bomb to Hiroshima and then getting attacked? Like, it's interesting that we take this big long 10-minute diversion in the middle of this story in a way.
Yes. I mean, I think so. I think story-wise it's important because it does set up Quint as this man who's almost got nothing left to lose. Right. And he has got this absolute core hatred for sharks.
Yes.
And so he's kind of made it his vocation. And I think that he sees this as like, this is the big one. This, it's a 25-footer. I've been hired to kill this shark. This is when I get my own back. And so I think that the story of the Indianapolis and him being in the water with the sharks and losing all of those crewmates, he talks about going over to say hello to one of them one morning. He sort of taps him on the shoulder and he just upends and he's been bitten in half below the waist. And, we talk about trauma nowadays. Like, don't fucking talk to me about trauma when you've got men who have been through stuff like this. And so I think plot-wise, it really helps with that. It helps to set Quint up with his motivation, right? But also, I think you're right. I think I'd be very surprised if there wasn't a through line that came down from films like Godzilla and this destruction that humans have wrought on the planet.
Yeah.
And literally the title of your season, Nature Biting Back.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, it's terrifying because these sharks are just doing what sharks do. There's no reasoning with them, right?
Yeah.
None of the men in the sea after the Indianapolis sank could reason with any of those sharks. They're just there, just left to the kind of natural instincts of these huge toothy creatures. And really, that's what we see in Jaws as well. They're just the kind of victims of this thing that is just doing what it does.
Yeah, I think that you're right. There's something really powerful about this. And it's a true story anyway, so it's not like it was made up for thematic purposes, but there is something really interesting about these group of human beings who deliver this thing that is in some ways man's biggest scientific accomplishment in a way,
right.
Whichever way you think about it.
Yeah.
Peak of kind of, we've all seen Oppenheimer and that idea that like you've almost become godlike, right, by inventing this creation. And then the men that deliver it are killed by something that is older than any of us and is the most natural thing in the world in some ways, right, as well. It's so interesting. Yeah. There's a kind of weird irony or something, isn't there, I think?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it's amazing. I think it's like a beautiful, such a chilling moment, and he delivers that monologue so well. And apparently, I saw on a documentary they were talking about that because it's not done in a single take, right? And actually some of that monologue is from the day one version where he was really pissed, and some of it was the day two where he was sober.
Oh, right.
But, like, I can't remember who was talking about it. I think it was Carl Gottlieb, and he's like, it's impossible to tell now which is which.
Well, I did not know that.
Yeah, so interesting.
He was tanked when he did that speech.
He wasn't really able to do it that day.
And at 3:00 in the morning, he called Stephen and said, "How badly did I humiliate myself?" And Stephen said, "Not fatally."
The next day, he came and did his stone sober and just knocked it out of the ballpark. Absolutely stone sober.
Where there are shots of him from day one drunk and shots of him from day two sober, and you can't tell. It's just a brilliant performance.
And actually, we haven't really mentioned, but Werner Fields, who edited it. I mean, this film is phenomenally edited, right?
Yeah,
it's so well edited.
And also, like, if part of that is from when Robert Shaw was drunk, again, like, talk about a talented actor, because if you deliver that sort of speech with that sort of weight when you're like half cut, then
it's the way he does. I mean, I know the character is supposed to be a bit pissed, but he kind of always has that slight slur in his delivery,
that sort of
doesn't
drawl,
he?
Yeah, definitely.
So good.
I'll never put on a life jacket again. So 1,100 men went in the war. 316 men come out. The Sharks took the rest June the 29th, 1945. Anyway, we delivered the bomb.
Finally, then, we get the kind of final showdown of these three guys and the shark. And it gets really fucking tense and nasty. Oh, my God. When Quint gets chomped and the boat is sinking. And, oh, my God, like, how do you find the way that this whole kind of story concludes?
Yeah, I mean, this is where Quint, like, really kind of loses it, right? So the shark is like, we've seen it properly now. It's popped out of the water and scared the shit out of
Oh, yeah, we didn't
Brody.
talk about the infamous jump scare. Yeah, of course. That you're going to need a bigger boat.
We're going to need a bigger boat.
Oh, my God. It's crazy, isn't it, when a film has so many incredible moments that you almost forget about the most iconic moment. Yeah,
right.
yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
But we've seen it a bunch now, and it's fucking massive, and we and they are terrified of it, absolutely naturally. I think there's a lovely bit when they're kind of doing the repairs because Quint has gone like full fucking psychopath by this point and is like, we're gonna lead it back into shore, and he won't let off of the engine, and they're kind of like shouting at him to slow down because you're gonna bust the engine, but he won't, and he's wild-eyed and he's singing, and you've got these two poor sods in the background just hanging on for dear life. And so the boat breaks, and Brody's learning, I think this is very cute, where he's like, the barrel's up, it's right in the stern. It's like, oh, you learned something. Yeah. Well done. But like Quint smashes the radio as well, which is absolutely like, oh my God, it's so infuriating and scary. And I think that's really the moment that you realise that, as you say, he doesn't care about getting these guys back to shore. It's like, it's him and the shark, and these guys are kind of incidental.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, the kind of tension just mounts and mounts and mounts. But also, this is really the moment where it kind of turns most like swashbuckly, right? It's like, it's kind of adventure film. So Williams' score, that kind of like the more adventurous part of his score is swelling,
right?
And you've got the camera kind of around the boat, and it's like ba 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 ba, and they're all like, it's so like adventurous, and they seem to be like enjoying it, and they're kind of on the hunt. But you kind of know that once Quint has tipped over the edge, and then the music kind of comes back, so it stops being the adventurous score, and you know that the shark is like, they're not hunting it, he's hunting them.
Yeah, totally. And oh my God, when Hooper goes down in the cage,
oh my God.
And again, like so many stories about the making of this particular sequence, right? That they got all this footage of a real shark attacking. I think they got a little person in a small cage. So it was a more normal sized shark, right?
Yeah.
And they wanted it to look bigger.
Basically, the second unit went to Australia with a couple of nature documentary filmmakers. And so it wasn't a little person, he was an ex-jockey.
Right.
His name was Carl Rizzo, and he was like 4'9" or something. Okay. And so they went out with Ron and Valerie Taylor, who were the nature documentary filmmakers. And they basically like scaled everything down for Carl Rizzo. So they had like a 5/8 cage and like little air tanks for him and a little spear gun and stuff. And so and then they also had a teeny weeny one, which was like with a little doll. So they kind of shot some stuff with the doll, and then shot some stuff with Carl Rizzo in his scaled down cage. And they had trouble with weather, and they sort of kept having to go back out, and essentially this shark, and yeah, fine, it's not 25 feet long, but it's still a fucking great white shark in Australia, where all the big ones really live. And it, like, as he was going into the cage, the shark like came up and like took the cage and basically like tore it to ribbons. And I think that when in the film they winch no, that can't be right because it's on the Orca. I was going to say, I think when they winch it out, then that's actual footage from
I think
that.
There is some actual footage, though, isn't there? Because there's a bit of footage they get where the shark is attacking an empty cage.
Oh, definitely underwater.
Yeah. Because then they rewrote some of the script again, because I think Hooper was supposed to die, actually, I think, originally. But because they got the shot of the shark attacking the empty cage, they basically reshot some bits where he got out of the cage and went down into the ocean in order to use that footage, essentially. So, again, the script script was constantly being changed because of the circumstances.
Because of, what they were actually able to get on camera.
Yeah, but you actually get some real great white shark footage in this moment, right? Which is really cool. I mean, initially, that was their initial plan, wasn't it? That before all of this, pre-production, they were like, we're going to train a shark.
We're going to train a shark.
And then they realised, no, that's impossible.
Bless.
And then Lucio Fulci's like, hold my beer. 2 years later. But yeah, they realised it was virtually impossible to work with a real shark in a legit Hollywood movie and not a weird Italian exploitation film, at least. So had to go with mechanical sharks and other things. But yeah, you do. You know, there is something about those particular shots where you get a bit of, again, real authenticity with a bit of real shark action there, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And just all the more chilling for it. Like Hooper going down in that cage.
Oh my God.
And he's so terrified that, like, that line where he says, like, I've got no spit, like, to kind of put in his mask, like, because he's just like terror, just like absolutely, he's just like a husk.
Well, yeah, I'm like, Hooper, did you not learn from last time? Like, stop going down under the water, you madman, as well, right? But
exactly.
Yeah.
But he needs to go down there so that he can basically get his drugs into the shark's mouth with his, and there's that again, like, there is a slightly softer moment with Quint after he's like slightly come down off of his manic episode, and he almost has to, well, he does. He has to sort of relent to Hooper, right? To kind of Hooper's expertise, his knowledge, his like kit that he's brought along. You know, it's not all fishing lines and harpoons. It's like, we're going to have to rely on something else because this fish is something different.
Yeah.
And so that moment where he says to Hooper something like, you're going to get that little needle like through his skin. And Hooper's like, no, but I think if I can get it close enough, then I can get it in the mouth with it. And then it's just like, oh, shit, well, how are you going to do that? Well, I'm going to go down in the cage.
Yeah, I'm going to go into a shark's mouth, basically. Cool. It's I mean, it's such tense. It's like, again, like the pacing of this final act. Because I remember I rewatched it last night. And I realised there were only like 10 minutes left of the runtime, and yet still we hadn't gone into under the ocean in the cage yet. I'm like, my God, like, it really kind of just like rollicks through those final sequences, doesn't it? It's amazing.
Yeah, he goes down and, you know, it's, you get like the massive shark kind of coming up behind the cage, and that's fucking terrifying. And he screams as it, like, again, that sort of wide eye, and you hear his scream sort of muffled like around his like respirator thing. And then after that happens, and like Hooper gets away, you're straight back up to the boat. So the shark doesn't waste any time at all and just like launches itself. And, you know, this is something that we know that great white sharks can do, right? We've all seen like footage from Attenborough and stuff of them literally like propelling themselves up out of the water, sort of eating like seals and, you know, God knows what. And it's so crazy to me that, you know, they are like tons and tons and tons of like, but I guess that's it. They're just muscle.
Right.
And because they are so streamlined and stuff, this is one of the things that's so scary about them is like, you know, the water is their domain. And so they can basically, you know, if they need to get up and out of the water to eat something or to bring themselves up on a boat to attack this old sea dog that's got a vengeance plan for them, they'll do it. And so, you know, shark just comes up onto the boat, gnashing teeth. And then a little bit reminiscent of the bit earlier in the film where you've got the fisherman like trying to get up the planks and can't. You just get this like almost inevitability of Quint like sliding down the deck of the boat towards this just big toothy hole.
That chomping down on him is horrible. And then Quint, like, again, like kind of spewing blood up in his mouth and
just like screaming. And, you know, he's this macho guy, right? Like he's been kind of, he's just so sort of like man.
Yeah.
And then just for him to like come to this tragic end and to see him in such like agony and to hear him screaming is just, it's so powerful and terrifying.
And then you're left with Brody, the one that doesn't like the ocean, that doesn't really know what he's doing, that is the audience surrogate completely by himself at this point, because Hooper is down under the ocean, Quint's dead. And it really is just then like him versus the shark, right? And he has to obviously shoot the canister that's in the mouth and everything. And again, it's just like perfectly directed and executed, that whole sequence, isn't it?
Oh my God. Like there's a shot from above, again, a little bit like earlier, where he's kind of like, because the boat's sinking, so he's like hanging onto the mast for dear life, and he's trying to get the rifle. And then you see the shark like just come up under him. And then, he sort of manages to kind of, I guess, like get himself sort of secure, like sort of with the crow's nest. Mm-hmm. And like, honestly, at this point, like I can't help like smiling and like grinning. I'm just like, yeah, come on, Brody. And he's like, show me the tank, show me the tank. And then obviously you get the iconic line, smile, you son of a bitch, as everything else goes quiet. So you've got the music swelling, and then it just cuts as he says that line.
Blow up! You son of a...
The gun fires, the tank explodes, the shark is fucking dog food. And it's just, so
satisfying, isn't it?
Oh, it's so satisfying.
It really is such a like stand up and cheer moment, I think.
100%, yeah.
It doesn't just die, it explodes into pieces, It's so
and
good.
I think it is so good. It's like the T-1000 at the end of T2, where the only you can sort of injure him and all that sort of thing, but like you have to like absolutely obliterate him to kind of like feel safe again. And that is what you need with this shark. Is you can't just like, I don't know, sort of stab it and hope that it swims off and dies. It's like, no, we need to see this son of a bitch explode.
So good. And that lovely little ending where it turns out Hooper's still alive and they attach themselves to the barrels and just like doggy paddle off together, basically, right? It's really sweet.
And Martin's like, I used to hate the water. And Hooper's like, can't imagine why.
Yeah, so good. Oh, and then credits roll straight away.
Yeah,
we don't need the aftermath. We don't need the put a blanket around them and put them in the back of an ambulance. Credits roll in and out. It's an alright film, isn't it?
It's alright. Yeah.
It'll do.
Might give it another watch at some point.
Right, exactly. Why not? There's still quite a lot to discuss because we need to talk about the reaction to this film and just the legacy of this film. So before we get to that, I want to move over to this week's Wild About Horror because, of course, Freudian cinephile and psychoanalyst Mary Wild has plenty of thoughts to discuss on Steven Spielberg's Jaws.
Hey Mike, Mary Wild here, with some thoughts on the OG summer blockbuster movie, Jaws, based on the 1974 novel by Peter Benchley. It follows Police Chief Martin Brody, who, with the help of a marine biologist and a professional shark hunter, pursues a great white shark that attacks beachgoers at a summer resort town. In Amity Island, an unseen force attacks and pulls swimmers underwater. Beaches are shut down by police, but Mayor Larry Vaughn wants them reopened, fearing that the town's summer economy will suffer. Oceanographer Matt Hooper confirms that an abnormally large shark killed the victims. When local fishermen catch a tiger shark, Mayor Vaughn rushes to declare the beaches safe again. A skeptical Hooper dissects the tiger shark but finds no human remains inside the stomach, concluding that the killer shark is still out there. Mayor Vaughn dismisses assertions that a great white shark caused the deaths and refuses to close the beaches. On the 4th of July weekend, masses of tourists pack the seafront. The shark enters a nearby lagoon, killing a boater and almost reaching Police Chief Brody's son. A guilt-ridden Mayor Vaughn agrees to hire the eccentric local shark hunter, Quint. The musical theme for Jaws revolves around an ostinato of bass notes, which composer John Williams said were meant to represent the shark as an unstoppable force of mindless and instinctive attacks. The simple alternating pattern of two notes became a classic piece of suspense music, synonymous with approaching danger. Williams described the theme as grinding away at you, just as a shark would do, instinctual, relentless, unstoppable. Jaws had broad cultural repercussions. Similar to the way the pivotal scene in Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho made showers a new source of anxiety, Jaws led many viewers to fear going into the ocean. Reduced beach attendance was attributed to it, as well as more reported shark sightings. It created negative stereotypes about sharks, causing legions of fishermen to kill thousands of sharks in tournaments. Steven Spielberg later said that he regretted the decimation of the shark population because of his film. Conservation groups say the film has made it considerably harder to convince the public that sharks should be protected. I view Jaws as a topographical restaging of Freud's hydraulic model of the mind. In this framework, the trajectory of desire is described like fluid poured into a maze-like structure, circulating freely. When the path of psychic energy is blocked in one section, it transfers like water onto a new section of the mind. Desire is always propelled forward, and if overly censored, it will cause emotional disturbance. Balance and emotional well-being depend on the manner in which desire moves around. The id is the primary source of spontaneous psychic energy, acting in accordance with the pleasure principle, seeking immediate gratification, regardless of social appropriateness, to maximize pleasure without delay. The ego, also known as the conscious personality, operates conversely on the reality principle, grasping the limitations of what's possible in the real world, trying to negotiate and make compromises. When unconscious yearnings reach the level of conscious awareness, they will invariably be met with a censoring agency in the form of the superego, an internalized authority that tries to prevent the expression of the wish by forcing the ego to act in accordance with societal norms and taboos. The original impulse is then repressed, but it's not a case of out of sight, out of mind, because the energy continues to long for expression and will look for alternative routes to return to the surface. Normally, desire will try to escape censorship by resorting to various disguises, such as slips of the tongue, fantasies, and dreams, always aiming to break down the barriers imposed by the ego. Not wanting to be locked away in the recesses of the mind, suppressed desires hitch a ride back to the threshold of awareness, like a spy infiltrating the land of consciousness, presenting a false passport to alter its true identity. Psychoanalytic treatment addresses where repression might be taking place and allows drives to be met directly, freeing up libidinal energy for conscious use in sublimation. Freud argued that the unavoidable tension between these various sections of the psyche constitutes the basis of civilization. Topographically, it's interesting to think about the ocean in Jaws as a vast reservoir of the unknown, fulfilling a role similar to the Freudian unconscious. The beach is literally where a line in the sand is drawn, demarcating conscious awareness. So where in the hydraulic model of the mind do all the Jaws characters slot in? I think that the untamed, chaotic energy of the shark represents the Freudian id, a primitive instinct without consideration for logical reality. Id demands are based solely on raw desire, irrespective of external world consequences. The shark is a stand-in for the aggressive and violent id impulses embedded in our nature, viewed as taboo by civilized society. Even though the conscious personality, i.e. the ego, forms to allegedly maintain balance in the mind, ensuring that our actions are socially appropriate, often what happens is that the ego displays a maladaptive pattern of denial about the id and the superego's internal war. Rather than directly confront what the shark implies psychologically, the ego doubles down in its calamitous refusal to acknowledge inner discord. In this way, we can imagine the delusional Mayor Larry Vaughn as a manic ego figure, insisting that the beach remain open to the public post-shark attacks because, quote, Amity is a summer town. We need summer dollars. If the people can't swim here, they'll be glad to swim at the beaches of Cape Cod, the Hamptons, and Long Island, end quote. Mayor Vaughn is comparable to the HR manager archetype, unwilling to look deeper and acknowledge the problem, famously refusing to examine the bowels of the captured tiger shark, stating, quote, Fellas, let's be reasonable. This is not the time or the place to perform some half-assed autopsy on a fish. I'm not going to stand here and see that thing cut open. End quote. Mayor Vaughn, in full ego mode, is responsible for perceiving the external world, making decisions, and solving problems. However well-intentioned, the ego tries to manage anxiety through defense mechanisms such as repression and denial. The superego is the so-called moral and ethical component of the psyche, internalized societal standards of right and wrong, functioning as a kind of conscience. The superego aims to suppress the urges of the id and strives to manifest perfection in the ego. I would say that the superego in Jaws is the abstract force of capital and Mayor Vaughn's guiding principle, strong-arming him to ignore and inhibit the primitive impulses of the shark, i.e. the id. The superego tends to be rigid and absolute in its demands, and sure enough, the mindset of profit over people is the main driver of the mayor's decisions. Just as Mayor Vaughn believes that he's acting in the town's best interest by downplaying the shark threat, the ego also suppresses id impulses in the misguided pretense that everything is hunky-dory. Mayor Vaughn stubbornly keeps the beach open in the name of uninterrupted economic growth, promising that the problem has been solved, but of course it hasn't. Let's remember that the fictional town in the film is called Amity Island. Amity meaning friendship and harmonious relations. I take this as an indication of the ego's wishful thinking, that opposing parts of the psyche can coexist peacefully side by side. The conceit in Jaws, however, is that the ego and the id are not besties, quite the opposite. The beach becomes the site of a shark attack, despite Mayor Vaughn's protestations. Neil Gabler analyzed Jaws as showing 3 different approaches to solving an obstacle. Science, represented by Matt Hooper, spiritualism, represented by Quint, and the common man, represented by Martin Brody. The last of the 3 is the one that succeeds, and so is endorsed by the film. To this I would add that the three men who embark on the heroic quest together represent the brave commitment to rupture the ego's arbitrary and superficial boundaries. The three of them form the aspect of subjectivity that willingly undergoes a dark night of the soul precisely to confront and overcome deep-seated fears. This commitment is densely packed with the life force, which I associate with the so-called jaws of life, a euphemism for hydraulic rescue tools such as cutters, spreaders, and rams that are used by emergency rescue personnel to assist in the extrication of victims involved in vehicle accidents as well as other rescues in small spaces. Ultimately, Quint, representing a dysfunctional trauma response, doesn't survive the journey, but Hooper and Brody complete their introspective mission, extricating themselves from the phobic state via the jaws of life. Until next time.
A big thank you to the wonderful Mary Wild. Always love hearing her takes on each film we cover. And if you want to hear more from Mary Wild, you can sign up to her Patreon, patreon.com/Mary Wild. Becky, let's talk a little bit before we wrap up just about what happened when this film was released, right? I mean, it became one of the first ever kind of proper summer blockbusters, right? And we've talked about all of the ways in which this film could have gone catastrophically wrong, right? This could have been a career-ending flop, right? This could have been a monumental, historic failure, like a film like Waterworld or Cleopatra or something. It almost could have been that, I think, right? It was 3 times over budget. It ran 100 days over schedule. You know, these days, I imagine that Steven Spielberg could have ended up a bit like, you know, Josh Trank or one of those filmmakers that got hired by Disney or Marvel, you know, swallowed up in that studio machine and then spat out and fired and never heard from again. I think that very easily could have happened had this film not been successful. Thankfully, the film was successful. Audiences absolutely loved it. There were queues around the block. There was merchandise being sold. It affected the way that people felt about the ocean, right? Like attendance to beach resorts went down after this film because it had such a huge impact. It made, from its like $10 million budget, it made something like $500 million, which at the time was just completely unheard of, right?
Just unheard of, yeah. I mean, how lucky that that Spielberg is essentially a genius. And also, like, you know, you coming back to what you were saying at the beginning, it's basically a bit of a miracle. It's lightning in a bottle. It's a perfect storm. Everything came together to make this film a success. The director, the stars, the script, the score, the marketing, the accidents, you know, the fact that it went wrong and that therefore made it a better movie.
Yeah.
You know, thank God for Spielberg and us that it just so happened that all of this stuff that looked like it was going to be so catastrophic, like every day of the shoot, then in the edit and, you know, through everything that they had in the can, basically, they were able to basically make the best film that's ever been made. So the fact that it was horribly over budget and had gone all of these days over the shooting schedule, it was like, well, it doesn't matter because we've made the best film that's ever made. So it's going to make loads of money and people are going to love it. And they're still going to be talking about it 50 years later and quoting it and watching it and, you know.
Yeah. It didn't become this kind of like famous flop by a director that no one ever heard from again, thank God, you know. It's actually incredible that that's the case. And obviously, like, and I'm going to spend the next couple of weeks on this podcast just talking about its legacy, really, and everything that came after it, a boom of kind of animal attack movies that was like, you know, oh, it's Jaws but with a bear, or it's Jaws but with a crocodile, it's Jaws but with piranhas, right? Like, this is again like one of the most important movies of all time, I think, in terms of like horror and monster movies. Just like briefly, how familiar are you with kind of the sequels and what came after it?
Never seen them.
So interesting. And is that just because you've just deliberately avoided them?
Yes. I think probably yes. It's back to my old one and done days. So, I never used to watch sequels because they were always critically panned. And I gave far too much of my time and attention to people telling me what to watch. And so she now makes a job of it. Sorry about that. So I just kind of never bothered. And since I've caught up with all of my sequel watching, as I have done over the last sort of 5 or 6 or 7 years, I just kind of haven't gotten around to / haven't prioritized the Jaws sequels, but I am probably going to watch them over the next couple of weeks. I'm off to Glastonbury next week, and I'm going to come home and I'm going to be a broken shell of a human being for a few days. And so my plan is I'm going to come home and watch all the Jaws sequels under a blanket on the sofa. So I'll report back.
I can't wait to hear what you think of them, because I'll be covering all 3 next week with Susan Cowman. And this was my first time watching all of them. I had never seen any of them either up until this, recording this series.
So why not? Had you actively avoided them?
I think I had, to be honest. I think I had no interest in them ever. And I'd heard so many bad things, particularly about Jaws 3D and Jaws 4, The Revenge, of course, that I just never felt the inclination to watch them. But I thought, well, gives me the perfect excuse. And it was quite a journey. It was quite a journey. We'll discuss them together, Becky, when you're back and you're watching them. But I can't wait to hear your thoughts. And do you compare do you still enjoy other shark movies? Because it's difficult, right, to watch Deep Blue Sea, The Reef, 47 Meters Down, whatever it might be, probably without comparing them to Jaws, right? But are you still able to enjoy kind of other shark movies?
I think I kind of disagree, because I can watch them without... do you know what? I think I watch all movies without comparing them to Jaws, because it's your favourite film of all time. And so what are you going to do? Ruin all cinema for yourself by comparing everything to your favourite film? So it's not just like it's my favourite shark film. It's like, I'd be making a terrible situation for myself if I compared everything to Jaws. So no, I love shark films. I love them. And I kind of just watch them. There's almost Jaws over here, and then there's like shark films over here. Right. So I'm more likely to compare The Shallows to
The Reef,
Deep Blue Sea or The Reef than I am to compare any of those to Jaws. I'm a huge fan of shark films, and I'm very excited to hear things unfolding on the series as it goes on. Still never seen a Sharknado though, so...
I know. yeah. It goes back to this idea of us just kind of avoiding the bad films, right? I think for the most part.
Life's too short, mate.
I still haven't yet seen The Reef, which I am going to be covering, but I know from both you and Stevie that it's a very scary, stressful experience, right?
It really fucked me up. Yeah,
God.
It was bad.
I get very easily fucked up by these movies. Yeah, okay. I'm very excited for it.
I've never watched Open Water because I'm too scared to watch Open Water. I remember so vividly it coming out and the reception it got, and everybody just talking about how unbelievably, excruciatingly terrifying and tense it was.
It's just horrible. It's it's like what we were talking about, that feeling of what it must have been like for those people on the Indianapolis, and that idea of just waiting and wading in open water for a shark to come and get you.
Just know
that it's just that feeling for 90 minutes, basically.
I don't think I can do it. I can do it with big toothy sharks and stuff. With a little bit of, it's scary, there's a deep ocean down there. I can't do 90 minutes of it. It would do untold damage, I think.
But I think you're right about that idea of separating them, because I don't know quite what it is, and maybe it's just that magic miracle lightning in a bottle thing that we've discussed, but as much as I love all other shark movies, none of them compare to Jaws, right? I don't think there'll ever be a movie that you go, oh, well, this is one that's as good as Jaws, right? And I don't know why. There's some sort of magic formula to this movie, right, that maybe we can't quite put our fingers on, but I don't think anything will ever match it. Do you know what I mean?
Not for me. I can't see it happening.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? Maybe it's the characters, the writing. I guess it's all the elements we talked about.
It's just everything.
Yeah. Well, there we go. Well, we did it, Becky. We did it. it ran over 2 hours. We've actually been talking about this film for longer than the runtime of the movie, but we did it. I think we covered most bases there. Thank you so much for joining me to discuss this incredible movie.
Thank you for letting me.
It's quite all right. What's your favourite, if you set, as we've been discussing, set Jaws aside for 1 minute and look at the rest of this subgenre, what's your fave? What's your favourite kind of animal attack movie?
I mean, it's probably Lake Placid.
Amazing.
I fucking love that film. I've always loved that movie. I mean, again, I'm not even really sure that you can lump The Birds in, because like The Birds again feels a little bit kind of like you can lump it into the series. That's not what I'm saying. I mean, like in terms of preferences, quality, it's just there's Jaws, then there's The Birds, then there's sort of everything else. But if we're talking about everything else, oh fuck, I mean, I saw the 1954 Godzilla for the first time a couple of weeks ago, which blew my mind. So that's got to be up there. But yeah, I mean, if we're talking just like we said at the beginning, if we're talking like these sort of fun, action-packed, popcorn munchy, like lighter of tone, Saturday afternoon, and you want to see Betty White feeding cows to a giant alligator, and it's got fucking Bill Pullman in it, so that's already an enormous tick in my column.
Come on.
So yes, I would say it would have to be Lake Placid. Incredible movie.
Amazing. Well, Becky, thank you so much. Just remind people, until you're next back, where can they find you and more of your work online?
Thank you. So you can find me on socials at Bunny Darke. I've got a website, which is beckydarke.com, where you can find out more about my writing and my podcasting, how to work together. There's a contact form on there if you want to get in touch. And I've got a Patreon as well, which is patreon.com/Bunny Darke, where I do regular exclusive writing about things like horny horror and films from the year 1982, which was the year I was born in, and also one of the best years in horror history. So you can sign up over there if you want to read my exclusive writing.
Incredible. And Becky and I run all of the screenings together, the EOH screenings. Becky, you're kind of instrumental in organising and hosting all of those with me. And I was thinking, as we were recording this, next year, 2025, will be the 50th anniversary of Jaws, right? We've got to do something.
Yes, please.
Yes, please. So keep an eye out for that. evolutionofhorror.com/events. That's where we're always plugging our live screenings.
Can we do one of those ones where we do it in a swimming pool and we all lie on rubber rings?
I did that with the Meg, and let me tell you, the experience of being on a lilo with a beer was much more fun than watching the Meg. But doing that with Jaws would be fucking great. Yes,
would be amazing.
Let's make it happen.
I mean, I've seen it at the Royal Albert Hall, but I've never seen it in a swimming pool. So let's do that.
Amazing. Let's do it. Becky, thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike.
And that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening. And one more time, a huge thank you to my brilliant guest, Becky Darke. What a fun film to discuss. I absolutely loved that conversation. I really hope you guys enjoyed that as much as we did. Please do send in your thoughts. You can email me, evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can also find us on all the socials, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. And if you want to discuss this week's episode with fellow listeners, join the discussion group, the Evolution of Horror discussion group on Facebook, or you can join the Evolution of Horror Discord. If you join the Discord, you can also join our weekly watch-alongs that happen every Sunday night. I believe this weekend, the folks on Discord are going to be watching Jaws 2 together, which is going to be a really fun night. If you want to get weekly bonus episodes, sign up to our Patreon channel, patreon.com/Evolution of Horror. We've currently got a Kaiju mini-series happening for $10 patrons, but $5 patrons will also get access to Fresh Blood, our monthly review strand, where we review and recommend all the new horror releases available on streaming and in cinemas. This podcast is part of the Evolution of Horror network, and if you want to check out our sister podcast, The Detective and the Log Lady, a Twin Peaks rewatch podcast with Stacey Ponder, check us out wherever you get your podcasts. You can find the Evolution of Horror wherever you get your podcasts, and if you get a spare minute, I'd be so grateful if you could drop us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or whichever app you use, as that always really helps us get discovered by new listeners. So, on to next week then, and I'm not ready to leave the Jaws universe just yet. We've got to dive in to the mixed bag of sequels that followed this movie. So next week is going to be an incredibly fun discussion. I am going to be joined by presenter and comedian Susan Calman, and we are going to be discussing Jaws 2, Jaws 3, and Jaws The Revenge. It's going to be quite a week. Join us next week for all of this and more on the evolution of horror.